Across mountains, deserts, oceans, and frozen frontiers, people have set out in search of discovery, beauty, or challenge, and never returned. Some left behind journals, others left only broken camps or whispers in the wind. What follows are the true stories of expeditions that ended in mystery, where the evidence tells part of the story and silence tells the rest. Franklin's Lost Expedition, 1845 Arctic. They say every mystery has a point where silence begins, the instant when ordinary days are broken and the unknown steps in. For the men of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, that moment came in the year 1845, when they pushed out of England's ports into the cold reaches of the Arctic Ocean. Their mission was clear, at least on paper: trace the elusive Northwest Passage, that fabled maritime link between the Atlantic and the Pacific. It was the golden prize of its age, promising trade, prestige, and power. But what began as a confident voyage soon became one of the greatest enigmas in exploration. The commander of this enterprise was Sir John Franklin, a seasoned officer with experience in both war and ice. His reputation carried weight. His name lent authority to the journey. His 2 ships were not simple wooden craft, but reinforced for polar service, their hulls strengthened, their holds filled with provisions that should have lasted years. They carried coal for engines, instruments for navigation, and food sealed in tins, a new technology promising preservation far longer than salted meat or hardtack. In all, 129 men sailed north under Franklin's flag. The expedition was last reliably sighted by whalers in Baffin Bay in July of 1845. Anchored to an iceberg, the ships were waiting for clear water before heading deeper into the unknown channels of the Canadian Arctic. After that day, they seemed to vanish into the fog, swallowed by the ice. Years would pass with no sign of their progress. No word from the crews, no report from returning ships. Families waited, governments worried, and slowly the silence grew heavier. By 1848, with no messages received, the British Admiralty sent out search parties. It was the beginning of a chase that would span decades and involve expeditions from Britain, America, and even private individuals. They scoured coastlines, followed maps drawn by earlier explorers, and questioned Inuit communities about strange sightings. For years they came back with little more than rumours and fragments, until in 1859 a group finally uncovered the first written clue. Hidden inside a stone cairn on desolate King William Island was a single piece of paper, now famous as the Victory Point Note. On it, in cramped handwriting, the officers recorded brief updates. Franklin had died in June of 1847. By April of 1848, with the ships trapped, 105 survivors had abandoned Erebus and Terror, setting out across the ice in search of escape along the Back River. That small scrap of paper was the last official record of the expedition. No journals, no logs, no personal letters have ever been recovered. The silence was broken only by what the ice surrendered in fragments. Searchers found 3 graves at Beechy Island, belonging to sailors who died within the first winter. Later discoveries revealed human bones scattered along coastal routes, often broken or bearing cut marks. Some researchers concluded that these showed evidence of cannibalism, acts of desperation by men pushed to the very edge. The possibility disturbed Victorian England, but the pattern on the bones was hard to ignore. Other explanations emerged with time. The preserved food in tins had been sealed with lead solder. Analyses of bones recovered in the 20th century revealed high levels of lead, suggesting poisoning. Lead can cause confusion, weakness, and stomach illness. Combined with scurvy, hunger, and cold, the effects could have been devastating. Yet even lead poisoning does not explain the total collapse. The Arctic is a place where the line between survival and death is drawn in minutes. Hunger, hypothermia, exhaustion, disease, and isolation all struck at once. Inuit testimony added vital pieces. Generations later, accounts still told of encounters with starving Europeans dragging sledges, of abandoned boats, and even of bodies left in the snow. Some spoke of seeing groups of men so weak they could barely walk. Oral history described the gradual dwindling of the party as they pushed south, scattered into smaller groups, each one swallowed by the wilderness. These stories offered glimpses but no closure. Then, in the 21st century, the Arctic itself yielded its largest revelation. In 2014, the wreck of Erebus was located beneath shallow waters, followed in 2016 by the discovery of Terror in deeper, darker seas. Both ships were remarkably well preserved in the cold, their timbers still intact, their cabins still holding objects left behind. Divers retrieved instruments, clothing, tools, and even sealed bottles. The arrangement of items suggested that the ships had not sunk in chaos but had been left, perhaps deliberately abandoned. Lifeboats found on land showed attempts to turn them into sledges, loaded with supplies and dragged across ice. These wrecks transformed the investigation. They gave archaeologists the first opportunity to look directly into the expedition's world, frozen in time. Yet even here, answers remained incomplete. Why were the ships abandoned if they were still intact? Why did the men take such heavy loads across terrain that would doom them to exhaustion? Why did they not leave more detailed records? Modern science has added further pieces. DNA analysis has identified some of the skeletal remains by linking them to living descendants. One officer, James Fitzjames, was matched to a molar found among the dead. Each identification personalises the story, giving names back to bones long anonymous. These advances humanise the tragedy but also emphasise its scale, and so the Franklin expedition remained suspended between evidence and silence. We know Franklin himself died early. We know the survivors marched south, dragging sledges over impossible ground. We know many perished on the way, their remains found decades later, sometimes broken, sometimes burned, sometimes strangely mutilated. We know lead, hunger, and disease all played their part. Yet we do not know the final hours of most men, nor the precise sequence of choices that doomed them. The sea and the ice keep much hidden. The story endures because it is more than one mystery. It is many. It is the fate of 2 ships. It is the suffering of more than 100 men. It is the persistence of a question through almost 2 centuries of searching. It is a reminder that exploration always carried shadows, that courage and ambition sometimes met a silence from which no news returned. Franklin's lost expedition became a cautionary tale, a puzzle for scientists, and a ghost haunting the Arctic. Each artifact, each bone, each memory handed down in story is a thread of evidence, but never the full cloth. To this day, the Franklin expedition remains a great unfinished chapter in human exploration, a vanished voyage that disappeared into the white, leaving behind not answers but echoes. André's Arctic Balloon, 1897. They came aloft with such hope. 3 men, 1 balloon, and a dream of flying over the yet unseen Arctic. On July 11, 1897, Salomon August André, with Niels Strindberg and Knut Frankel, launched from Danes Island in Svalbard with a hydrogen balloon named Ornen, the Eagle. Their goal, reach or overfly the North Pole by air, then descend somewhere in Russia or North America. But within hours, the dream would turn fragile. From the moment it lifted, the Eagle struggled. The drag ropes meant to help steer tangled and strained. The balloon's skin was already leaking hydrogen. Cold and moisture froze seams and added weight. Within hours, they had to jettison ballast, then cargo, just to stay aloft. The fragile balance between lift and dead weight grew more precarious. Soon the balloon could no longer maintain altitude, drifting at the mercy of winds it could not command. After 65 hours aloft, covering some 295 miles, the explorers were forced down onto the drifting pack ice. Their landing was not catastrophic, but the terrain was harsh and unstable. They were hundreds of miles from solid land surrounded by shifting floes. From that point forward, their journey would become a struggle against ice, cold, hunger, and disorientation. The men were not entirely unprepared for travel on ice. They had sledges, a small collapsible boat, some supplies, and instruments. They set out across the frozen sea, dragging loads heavier than seemed humanly possible. Strindberg documented the journey in photographs and notes. He captured the drifting ice, the men pausing to rest, the endless whiteness around them. He also noted the weight of his camera gear, in itself a burden. Each step was a test. They hoped to reach a known depot, or perhaps land. But the currents and shifting ice thwarted their efforts. They marched in a zigzag of directions, sometimes east, sometimes southwest, depending on where ground might exist. They found occasional scraps of wildlife, seals, polar bears, sometimes killing meat to supplement their diminishing rations. But these meals were unpredictable, and their gear was not made for prolonged sled travel in these conditions. As temperatures dropped and winter shadows lengthened, fatigue and cold crept deeper. Their diaries record suffering, cold-soaked boots, frozen fingers, diarrhea, exhaustion. One member was plagued by illness, another's gait slowed. The pressure of dragging sledges across fracturing ice seems almost unimaginable now. For 33 years, no one knew precisely what had become of them. The world speculated, rumours spread, science waited for answers. Then in 1930, a Norwegian expedition, the Brattvåg, chanced upon their final camp on an island known as Kvitoya, or White Island. They found remains, gear, journals and photographs preserved in ice. The rediscovery created a shock across Sweden. The men who had vanished so long ago were now found. The artifacts from that site allowed historians and scientists to peer deeper into the final months of their lives. The diaries and meteorological logs gave maps and bearings of their route. Strindberg's camera plates, water-stained and brittle, still held images of the expedition's progress. The route maps, survival logs, daily notes, all became pieces of a puzzle. Analysis of their journals reveals changes over time. The forces of fatigue, frustration, shifting plans. They initially aimed eastward, but drift forced them to reorient. As supplies dwindled, they skipped planned depot stops. Their calculations of latitude and longitude show them wandering. When they neared Kvitoya, the ice began to break. They set up a final camp there, possibly building a shelter against the wind using what remained of their tent or driftwood. Some clues from their remains are stark. When the bodies were exhumed, injuries consistent with trauma were present. Broken bones, fractures, perhaps falls. One body was found buried under apparent displacement of ice. The tools and clothing left behind showed signs of patching and improvisation. The men had used silk from their balloon's envelope to reinforce garments or tents. They scavenged parts of their boat and sledges for frame or repair material. Their nutritional stress is evident too. Their diaries speak of diet shifting increasingly toward wildlife meat, sometimes poorly cooked. The records show periods of starvation or near starvation. Entrails of animals might not have been eaten fully. They rationed calories, battled frostbite, and struggled with dehydration when ice melt was scarce. One mystery remains: exactly when and how each man died. The sequence is uncertain. Some scholars believe Strindberg, the youngest, was first to succumb, possibly from exhaustion or disease. He may have died or become incapacitated before the others. Another may have died in a polar bear attack or during an attempt to reach land. André may have been the last, perhaps remaining alive in the shelter, alone, bereft of companions. The geographic position and nature of the final camp raise questions. Why had they chosen Kvitoya? Did they drift unknowingly into its vicinity, or did they aim for it? The terrain was harsh and poorly mapped. Strong currents may have forced them into that trap. The final campsite is not large. They would have had to ration shelter and space tightly. Bones and fragments suggest they huddled close, perhaps rebuilding what they could of their shelter from pieces of sledges and driftwood. Another puzzle is how much foresight or overconfidence influenced their planning. André believed in drag ropes as a method for balloon steering, but that system failed early. He also trusted in the new technology of hydrogen flight, perhaps too much. He ignored warnings about balloon leakage and the danger of gas loss in cold, moist air. His faith in technology overshadowed more mundane needs, more robust survival training, better backup routes, simpler gear. The contrast between their hopes and reality becomes clear in their journals. Early entries describe scenic aerial views, plans for dropping supplies, mapping with cameras. Later entries shrink to survival, counting rations, noting foot pain, repairing gear, assessing the threat of ice cracks. The shift from explorer ambition to survival crisis is gradual, but it is present in their own words. Even now, gaps remain. No definitive cause of death can be universally agreed upon. Was it starvation, hypothermia, a fall, disease, animal attack, all of the above in combination? The artifacts allow competing theories. Some point to lead poisoning from tin cans in their earlier supplies. Others emphasize the physical trauma of moving over broken ice. Some highlight infection exposure, internal damage. Multiple scientists have re-examined the site over time using modern methods. Radiocarbon dating, materials analysis, soil chemistry, forensic anthropology. Each lens adds nuance. Sometimes a new hypothesis emerges. Maybe one man died earlier, leaving two to struggle on. Maybe the ice shifted suddenly, crushing their tent. Maybe animals scavenging disturbed bodies, complicating interpretation. What the Andrée expedition reveals is how fragile human plans are in the Arctic. A balloon ride seemed like a bold shortcut, but the forces of wind, ice drift, cold and weight leaked into the frame of the plan from the start. Their remains, preserved in snow and silence, speak in fragments. Gear, camera plates, bones, journals. They allow us a partial return to their path, but not full redemption of their last days. In the frozen drift they vanished, driven not by one disaster but by a succession of small failures. Their ambitions stretched across ice and sky, but in the end it was the ice that held them fast. The unanswered questions remain, but the artifacts and diaries let us walk behind their steps, even when their voices grow faint in the cold. Mallory and Irvine. Everest, 1924. They say mountains keep secrets in stone and ice, waiting centuries for the wind to whisper them out. In 1924, 2 British climbers dared to press that secret. George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine embarked on a summit attempt of Everest, one of the most audacious in its time. They vanished into thin air at nearly 8,000 metres. For decades, their fate was a puzzle. In 1999, Mallory's body was rediscovered. In 2024, partial remains of Irvine surfaced. But the central question remains: did they ever stand on the summit? From Everest Base Camp to the icy ridges above, the 1924 expedition was built on ambition and boldness. Mallory was already a veteran climber, familiar with high altitudes and danger. Irvine, younger and less experienced, brought a skill that mattered. He understood oxygen apparatus. They were roped together for the final push. Their plan: ascend via the North Ridge route, using supplemental oxygen to make the effort possible. They departed Camp 6 significantly late in the day, hoping to time summit and descent carefully. Edward Norton, one of the expedition leaders, had pushed altitude records before. On that fateful third attempt, Mallory and Irvine were last seen by fellow climber Noel Odell. At around 12:50 p.m, Odell claimed to see 2 figures climbing what he believed was the second step, a notoriously difficult rocky barrier near the summit ridge. Then they vanished from view. No direct radio, no final note, no confirmed photograph remained. Their disappearance froze into mountaineering lore. Years passed. No trace stood firm. Many climbed the mountain, none found them. Their names became whispered legends, the men who might have been first to conquer Everest, or who died in trying. Then, in May 1999, an international search team led by climber Eric Simonson set out to find tangible evidence. Their goal: locate a body, recover a camera. The camera, if intact, might settle whether Mallory and Irvine reached the summit by capturing a summit photograph. The search area was guided by past reports, including a 1975 Chinese expedition claim of a body seen high on the north face. Simonson's team focused on a snow terrace above the northeast ridge. On May 1st, at about 8,156 metres, Conrad Anker spotted a patch of white emerging from scree, what turned out to be Mallory's body. It lay partly buried in ice and debris, silent and still, preserved by the cold. The find electrified the climbing world. Examination of Mallory's remains revealed both telling and frustrating clues. His body was face up, arms outstretched, his right foot broken, legs twisted unnaturally. A rope was looped around his waist, indicating he and Irvine were still attached when disaster struck. Cuts and abrasions marked his ribs, shoulders and torso. His goggles were in a pocket, not on his face. Some see that as indication he died after dark. In his clothing, a single tin of meat lozenges, a handkerchief, letters and small tools were preserved, but no camera was found. The absence of the camera postpones resolution. The simplest wish, a photograph showing whether they stood on the top, remains unfulfilled. Many experts argue the lens and film would have degraded or been displaced long ago. Others hold out hope that it lies nearby, buried under ice, waiting for discovery. Then in late 2024, an expedition by National Geographic reported finding partial remains potentially belonging to Irvine. On the Rongbuk Glacier below Everest's north face, they discovered a boot containing a foot wrapped in a sock labelled A.C. Irvine. The boot lay at a lower altitude, suggesting it came from a different fall or was transported by ice flow. The sock's label gives weight to the identification. If confirmed by DNA, this discovery would finally locate Irvine after a century of disappearance. With Mallory's body and now Irvine's partial remains, the mystery enters a new phase. We can compare positions, injuries, and context to refine theories. Did they reach the summit and fall during descent? Or did they perish before cresting the ridge? Some argue Mallory's body position suggests he fell only part way, not from the peak. The rope jerk marking on his torso implies sudden arrest, perhaps a fall when the other climber slipped, but whether that fall came on ascent or descent remains unknown. There are further puzzles. Mallory's snow goggles were in his pocket, not on his face. If he had descended after sunset, he might have removed them, or he might not have needed them if he died in darkness. His daughter claimed he carried a photograph of his wife, intending to leave it on the summit. That photo was not found on his body. Some read that as a hint he reached the summit and left it there. Others counter that the photo might have been lost or removed over time. The error margins in mapping also complicate things. The terrain around the top is fractured and variable. The glacier below moves, bodies, boots and gear can shift over decades. The difference in altitude between where Mallory and Irvine's remains were found suggests ice flow separated them. If one fell earlier, the remains could drift downward while the other remained caught higher. The search expeditions since 1999 have scoured various ridges, but none found the camera. In 2001, 2004, and 2007 teams returned, mapping historical camps and examining terrain features. They located camp remains, oxygen cylinders, but no new bodies. The possibility remains that the camera is buried deep in snow or collapsed under rockfall. One theory holds that they reached the summit, but during descent one slipped, dragging the other down. The rope jerk injuries suggest sudden force. Others propose they fell during the climb before even reaching the top, or that they separated, each going a different path, meeting disaster separately. Some suggest low oxygen, fatigue, or a collapse of snow or cornice pushed them over a ledge. The 2024 Find fuels new mapping models. Investigators will compare the boot location, estimate possible fall arcs, reconstruct potential routes, consider altitude, fatigue, and weather. Could they have walked off the ridge and then slipped into a fatal fall farther down? Could one have lingered longer before collapse? The remains and injuries provide constraints for these models, but do not fix a single narrative. The mystery of Mallory and Irvine is a testament to the limits of human exploration. They climbed with courage, ambition, and limited tools. They disappeared into wind and stone, leaving behind small signals. One body, one boot, a sock, fragments of the puzzle. We piece them together and project theories, but the summit remains unverified under their names. Climbing Everest is as much about what is lost as what is gained, and the mountain guards its secret still. Mawson's Far Eastern Party, 1912 to 1913 Antarctica. He was alone in the white silence. Ahead, nothing but the wind and snow. Behind, years of friendship, sacrifice, loss. That solitude was earned by a path few would dare tread. In late 1912, Douglas Mawson set out across Antarctica with two companions, determined to map unknown coasts. By the journey's end, only he would return, carrying the ghosts of what had happened. In November 1912, Mawson left the Cape Denison base in Commonwealth Bay, joined by Lieutenant Belgrave Ninnis and Swiss skier Xavier Mertz. The three men, with teams of huskies, aimed to push east across ice and glaciers, exploring towards Victoria Land. The plans were bold. They stocked fissured glaciers, caches, sledges, scientific gear, photographic plates. Each man left letters and diaries they hoped to bring home. Conversations were optimistic. The journey would yield new lands, new data, prestige for science and country. The first weeks passed with promising progress. They covered distance across fast ice, breaking trail amid sastrugi and wind. Mertz skied ahead, scouting crevasses. Ninnis walked beside the second sledge and Mawson managed loads. They passed glaciers, rugged slopes and shifting ice bridges. Each night they camped, shared readings, plotted latitude and replenished strength for the next day. But the ice holds hidden danger. On December 14th, disaster struck. They were crossing a snow bridge, thin ice concealing a yawning crevasse. Mertz, scouting ahead, cried out, "Crevasse!" and lunged aside. Mawson and Ninnis followed. In that split moment, Ninnis and a sledge full of their best supplies plunged through the snow into darkness. Mertz and Mawson, stunned, peer over the ledge. Beneath them, bits of sledge gear and 2 dogs lying on a ledge 150 feet down. No trace of Ninnis. He had disappeared into the abyss. Ninnis had been the steady force holding their balance. Now gone, his absence struck immediately. He had been carrying most of the food, the dog feed, the tent, key stores. The ice had claimed more than a man. It devoured their mission's backbone. Mawson and Mertz felt the weight of what remained. Minimal rations, battered morale, a narrowing path of survival. In shock, they held a quiet memorial at the edge. Then they turned to survival. Pressing onward westward would stretch their food. Going coastward would extend time on shifting ice with no guarantee. They chose inland return, hoping to reach known depots. But without dog feed, they had to use dogs for food. One by one, they shot their dogs. They boiled meat, took livers, consumed everything. Food that once might have been unspeakable now became essential. Their journals record deterioration, fatigue, nausea, confusion, skin problems. Mawson writes of cold inside the tent, of flesh chafing, of thoughts losing focus. They lost mental clarity. Mertz's health faltered. His gait slowed. His speech slurred. He became delirious. At one point, Mawson restrained him as he raged inside the tent. He placed him in his sleeping bag, shared the weight on the sledge, but found progress negligible. Then came January 8th, 1913. Mertz died. He lay quiet in the tent, breathing shallow. Mawson buried him under blocks of snow, marking his grave with spare beams, reading a service from memory. That morning the world was only for Mawson, and his grief merged with the cold. Behind him lay the wreckage of a failed plan. Ahead lay a stretch of more than 100 miles of ice. Crevasses, wind, and exhaustion. He cut his remaining sledge in half to lighten the burden. He rearranged what was left. Fuel, minimal tools, scraps of food, his own strength. He set out foot by frozen foot into the solitude of the continent. In the days that followed, he recorded horrors. The soles of his boots peeled from his feet. His body lost weight rapidly. He felt as though his flesh was rotting. Mucous membranes cracked, skin peeled, appetite gone. He fell through a crevasse lid once. His harness and sledge held him. He spent long hours climbing out, bruised, exhausted. He built a ladder from spare parts, carried it over his shoulder and used it to scramble from icy holes. He travelled at barely 5 miles a day. His route took him across the Mertz Glacier, then toward nunataks and ridges he recognised. On January 28th, he spotted a cairn draped in black cloth. There, a note from relief parties, food caches nearby, coordinates, and confirmation that his team at base had waited for him. He was within reach of known ground. The last stretch was brutal. He did not have crampons, the ones at base had been lost or left. He fashioned nails into makeshift crampons from wood and scrap. Blizzards pinned him inside ice caves. He lay motionless until the wind passed. Then he climbed down steep slopes inch by inch, until finally he arrived at the hut. But the ship that was to collect them had left hours before. The Aurora left Cape Denison while Mawson was days away, retreating to avoid being iced in. He had crossed the continent and returned too late. In Cape Denison, Mawson was greeted by a waiting emergence of grief, confusion, and survival. He had lost 2 close companions, men who had laughed, planned, shared that bright expedition. Their names, Ninnis and Mertz, would live on in glaciers and memorials. He himself returned weakened, shell-shocked, and forever changed. The cause of Mertz's final decline remains debated. Some believe hypervitaminosis A played a role. He and Mawson had eaten the livers of their sled dogs, and those organs carry extremely high concentrations of vitamin A. That toxin can cause nausea, skin peeling, irritability, and organ damage. In Mertz's later diary entries, peculiar symptoms appear: vomiting, delirium, weakness. Other scholars argue the cold, combined with starvation and psychological shock, were enough. There's no single proof. Further analyses of equipment and bones from the expedition's records show that they consumed nearly every bit of edible tissue. They patched clothes with silk, they ate tendons, they scraped fuel to cook. In their sledges they abandoned scientific instruments, photos, lenses. Too heavy, too precious, but too burdensome in that stretch. Many of their capabilities were lost along the return road, traded for life. Mawson's survival itself remains a marvel. To push onward after months in the cold, after grief, after injuries, required a resolve that defies measurement. His final days show staggering difficulty. Frostbite so severe his toes and fingers darkened, hunger so sharp his mind blurred. But step after frozen step, he continued. This expedition leaves haunting echoes. 3 men bound by scientific ambition, pulled across fractured ice, unaware of how thin the thread would become. When that thread snapped, only one remained to tell the tale. The skeletal journals, the weather logs, the supplies lists, the notes buried in cairns, all became evidence for scholars to reconstruct that hellish return. The Far Eastern Party's story is not one of mystery in the sense of disappearance into oblivion. It is also a story of how decisions, hidden dangers, environmental forces and human frailty converge. From the crevasse that swallowed Ninnis, to the illness that claimed Mertz, to the desperate journey that nearly claimed Mawson, the expedition is an anatomy of survival under extremity. As we carry forward, this story lets us understand another kind of mystery, not only of those who vanish entirely, but of those who survive and speak, bearing memory, pain, silence, and just enough clues so that later ears can piece together what went wrong and why. Kamardaban of the Korovina Group, 1993, Siberia. She came down bleeding and silent, her eyes wide, her clothes torn, a single figure emerging from forest and snow. That moment would mark the end of one story and the beginning of many questions. In August 1993, in the Kamardaban Mountains of Siberia, 7 hikers departed on what should have been an adventurous trek. Only one would return, and what she described would unsettle locals, investigators, and theorists for decades. On August 2nd, 7 people assembled in Petropavl, Kazakhstan, under the leadership of Lyudmila Korovina, 41, a veteran mountaineer and instructor. With her were 6 students aged between 15 and 24, Alexander Krysin, Tatiana Filipenko, Denis Shvachkin, Valentina Utachenko, Victoria Zalesova, and Timur Bapanov. Their plan? Hike from the shores of Lake Baikal, cross mountain ridges, reach the watershed between 2 rivers, and meet a separate group led by Korovina's daughter on August 5th. Their route was mapped, supplies laid, equipment prepared. The first days went smoothly. The group moved up valleys following the Langutai River, ascending toward the Langutai Pass and along ridges toward the Khan Ula and other summits. They passed forested slopes, alpine meadows, rocky outcrops. On August 4th, as they began descending, weather turned. Rain fell, chill set in, their gear became damp. They attempted to camp on exposed ground. Tents were pitched, but anchoring was difficult in soft soil and wind. That night their tent ropes tore. They repaired them. In the morning, one peg ripped free, the tent sagged. Clothing and sleeping bags were soaked. They prepared breakfast, restarted the trek. At an altitude near 2,396 meters, while descending a slope, the group encountered a sudden crisis. According to Valentina Utachenko, the sole survivor, Krysin, walking at the rear, cried out, bleeding from his eyes and ears, convulsing violently. He collapsed. Korovina, rushing back, also began to show the same symptoms, collapsing atop Krysin. Filipenko nearby grabbed at her throat, gasping. She staggered to a rock, repeatedly striking her head until motionless. 2 others, Zalesova and Bapanov, attempted to run, but mid-flight they collapsed too, vomiting blood, clawing at their throat, removing clothes, tearing at flesh. Shvachkin and Utachenko fled later, until Shvachkin also fell, convulsing. Valentina, wounded and terrified, descended alone. The image is gruesome. Bodies partially undressed, signs of violent collapse, bleeding and foaming. When rescuers eventually found the victims, bruises on lungs appeared, internal damage inconsistent with cold alone. Yet the official autopsies concluded that 5 had died of hypothermia, 1 by heart attack, Korovina, with malnutrition or protein deficiency as a contributing factor. All of the bodies were found in terrain below where they had camped. Their clothing was wet. Many layers had been removed. Search efforts did not begin immediately. The group's failure to meet the rendezvous prompted concern, but only on August 24th did police act. Helicopters took 2 days to locate the bodies, partly because Utachenko had not yet regained coherent speech to guide them. The delay meant that environmental deterioration, animal scavenging, weather effects, and decay would all affect the evidence. The physical evidence is disturbing and partial. The bodies had no major external wounds beyond bruising, no knife cuts, no signs of interpersonal violence. But the internal signs, pulmonary hemorrhage, edema, lung damage, raise questions. The removal of clothing suggests paradoxical undressing, a known symptom in extreme hypothermia when victims feel burning inside and begin to strip off garments. But in this case, the stripping seems more violent, more frantic. The patterns don't match typical profiles. The sequence described by Yutachenko is extreme: convulsions, bleeding, collapse. Yet autopsies found no toxins or clear chemical traces in standard reports. Some researchers suggest poisoning or chemical agent exposure, or a fast-acting pulmonary edema. Others point to the possibility of infrasound, a low-frequency vibration induced by wind over ridgelines, creating a terrifying sound or pressure that can cause panic, respiratory distress, disorientation. Some have proposed that accidental exposure to nerve agents or environmental toxins could match convulsions and bleeding, but none of these theories have been conclusively proven. Weather conditions that day were poor: cold, rain, wind. Their gear was soaked, energy reserves were dipping. They may already have had mild hypothermia. The body's ability to maintain core temperature was compromised. Into that fragile state, some sudden stressor may have been introduced. Whether that was a pathogen, a sudden toxic exposure, or some atmospheric phenomenon is unknown. The timing and spatial distribution of bodies complicate understanding. Why did some collapse where they stood, others only after fleeing? Why remove clothing? In many hypothermia deaths, paradoxical undressing happens late in collapse. Here clothes seem violently stripped in mid-panic. The lack of struggle or defensive wounds argues against attack. The lack of external trauma beyond bruising suggests the killers were internal physiology, not force. The survivor's testimony is both crucial and problematic. Yutachenko's recollections are fragmented, initially incoherent. She could only speak after days. Her account describes dramatic convulsions, bleeding from eyes and ears, symptoms not typical in cold. Her narrative includes smelling burning or chemical odour. But memory under trauma is notoriously unreliable. Investigators cannot accept every detail literally. Still, her voice is the only guide through the fog. Investigators also studied water sources. Could contaminated water from mountain streams have introduced toxins? Lake Baikal region has industrial pollutants. Runoff might carry heavy metals or chemical waste. That hypothesis is considered, but toxicology reports were inconclusive. Some suggest mushroom poisoning. Korovina was known to teach foraging. A misidentified fungus could cause neurotoxicity, but that alone seems weak to explain convulsions and bleeding. Another line explores physical stress. At altitude, weakened nutrition, damp clothing, sudden exertion, these stressors push the body toward failure. Add to that possible hemorrhagic edema in lungs, perhaps triggered by infection or sudden pressure change. Lungs flood, gas exchange collapses, convulsions follow, collapse is sudden. The frantic removal of clothes could be an element of confusion, extreme discomfort, or panic. Modern reinterpretations sometimes compare this incident to Dyatlov, noting similarities: group splits, partial undressing, internal damage, the presence of a sole survivor. But Kamardaban differs in scale, terrain, and evidence. The cold exposure aspect is stronger here, yet the violent collapse details set it apart from typical hypothermia deaths. The record of equipment and logistics matters. Their tents had failed ropes, their sleeping bags and clothes were soaked, their anchoring in exposed terrain was weak. The decision to camp in exposed ground speaks to misjudgment under worsening weather. Wet clothing next to skin accelerates heat loss. These are mortal factors, yet those failings would predict gradual exhaustion, not convulsions and bleeding. Something extra seems needed to push them over the edge. The internal bruise patterns in lungs suggest overpressure or strain on capillaries. That hints at a sudden rise in internal pressure, perhaps from inhaled toxins or extreme exertion under respiratory distress. Could high winds driving gas molecules into lungs create such pressure? Could rapid temperature change provoke internal rupture? These are speculative, but they draw on the evidence we have. Even decades later, researchers revisit Yutachenko's interview transcripts, forensic notes, autopsy slides, weather records, terrain maps. Some travel to the site, place chain-of-sight analyses, test atmospheric models for infrasound generation, compare blood work for heavy metals. None of this yields firm consensus. New techniques may someday re-evaluate stored tissue samples, but for now the questions stay. This is Kamardaban's mystery, a group departing in confidence, moving through mountain ridges and forest streams, encountering a descent that became a nightmare. A lone survivor emerges, wounded, traumatized, her memories flickering between clarity and haze. Bodies lie in slope and scrub, with torn clothing, internal damage, bruised lungs, no clear external cause beyond exposure. Theories clash. Cold alone seems insufficient. Toxins seem unproven. Atmospheric oddities are speculative. We move forward now through more tragedies, more vanished expeditions, until we reach the place in 1959 where 9 hikers perished on a Ural slope, and the cold swallowed their story in the dark. Dyatlov Pass, 1959 Urals. They found the tent first. Half buried, tilted in the wind, its canvas slashed from the inside, boots and coats left as if time had stopped. On February 26, 1959, the search team on Kholat Syakhl looked in and saw bowls set out, a stove not yet lit and bedrolls hastily abandoned. 9 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic had camped there on February 1st. None of them was at the tent. A single file of footprints, many in socks or bare feet and some in light boots, led down the slope toward the tree line. 2 kilometers below, rescuers reached a cedar and a clearing. Branches were broken high, bark scraped, the snow scuffed by a fire that burned low. Beneath that cedar, the first 2 bodies lay, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, wearing undershirts and shorts, with burns on their skin and hands. Between the cedar and the tent lay 2 more, Igor Dyatlov and Zinaida Kolmogorova, fallen as if crawling back uphill. Rustem Slobodin was found later on the same line, with a skull fracture and freezing injuries. All 4 were ruled to have died of hypothermia. The last 4 bodies were missing for months. When the snow retreated in early May, searchers followed a shallow depression near the cedar into a ravine cut by a stream. There they found traces of a shelter lined with spruce branches and clothing. Inside and nearby lay Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibaut Brignol. Thibaut Brignol had a massive skull fracture. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs and internal bleeding without external cuts. Dubinina's body lacked a tongue and eyes, and 2 others had missing soft tissue of the face. Investigators gathered diaries, camera rolls, and testimony from those who saw the group set out. Dyatlov's team left Sverdlovsk in late January for a winter ski trek rated Category 3, the highest for youth groups. They travelled by train and truck to last settlement, then on skis. On January 31st, they cached supplies in a forested valley for the return. On February 1st, they moved toward the pass, but wind and whiteout pushed them off course. Rather than lose altitude, they pitched the tent on the open slope before dark. What happened that night is the core. The tent was slit from within. Bedding, boots, and warm clothes were left in place. Footprints showed a measured walk toward the cedar. The bodies at the cedar were lightly dressed, and clothing on the ravine group showed garments had been taken from the first dead. There was evidence of a hurried snow shelter near the stream, with cut branches and layered clothing for insulation. Autopsies recorded hypothermia for 5 and fatal trauma for 3, with 1 case listed as hypothermia with injuries. Low radiation on a few garments likely stemmed from earlier workplace exposure and cross-contamination during storage. The prosecutor's file used the phrase "a compelling natural force" that the hikers could not overcome, and the case closed without a single named cause. The search effort shaped the story. Families waited in Sverdlovsk when the group failed to send a telegram on time. Students and teachers raised the alarm. Rescue teams formed with Mansi hunters and soldiers. Rumours started early. Lights, secret tests, escaped prisoners, and the idea of an attack by the local Mansi. Modern analysis reframed the night. Snow science shows a small, dense slab can release above a tent hours after it is dug into a slope, when a thin, weak layer fails under wind loading. A slab need not be large to crush and frighten. A block knee-high to chest-high can pin a person and break ribs. Cutting out of the tent fits a rush to escape a collapsing wall and the risk of a second release if they stayed put. Wind on that ridge flows down slope, bitter and constant. Katabatic gusts strip heat, fill lungs with cold air and drown voices. The cedar shows frantic work, branches torn for kindling, burns on hands from tending a fire too closely. When the fire failed and 2 men collapsed, others took their clothing and moved toward the ravine. There they began a snow den. In darkness, a step may drop into a stream cut. A fall into that trench, with a roof of heavy snow, can break ribs and skull without leaving sharp external wounds. The missing soft tissue has long been used to claim the unnatural, but soft tissue vanishes quickly in meltwater and is taken by scavengers. Eyes and a tongue are among the first losses. The footprints remain a sober anchor. Notes describe a line of prints from the tent widening near the forest. No other fresh sets were seen. Investigators walked the site with the Mansi. Their older tracks and hunting sign were distinct and separate. The event unfolded within the group, not by ambush or chase. As for lights in the sky, some witnesses in the region reported fireballs that winter, but those reports do not align to a precise time and do not tie to the slope. The terrain shows no blast, no scorched trees beyond the small fire at the cedar. The Mansi helped recover the dead and guided searchers. There is no evidence of conflict between the hikers and local people. In 2019, prosecutors re-examined the case and pointed to avalanche processes and terrain as the most likely cause. Independent teams modelled slab behaviour on shallow angles and showed how a small release could explain damage to the tent and injuries to the ravine group. The pass bears Dyatlov's name now. Memorials stand at the tree line and in the city they left behind. Diaries remain, with entries about skis, songs, jokes, cold, and a last photograph of a tent in a rising storm. Their final night carried no strangers in the dark. It carried snow, wind, fear, and the choices people make when everything starts to move and the temperature drops. Shivruai Pass tragedy, 1973 Kola Peninsula. They left in winter's half-light, confident in training and gear, bound for a journey through Siberia's frozen ridges. On January 25, 1973, 10 students from the Kubyshev Aviation Institute set off on a ski trek across the Lovozero Massif, Kola Peninsula. Their route would pass Shivruai Pass. For a time all seemed ordinary, snow, wind, determination, but soon their trajectory would shift from expedition to enigma. The group included instructor Mikhail Kuznetsov, co-leader Valentin Zemlyanov, and 8 students. They registered a route from Elmurayok Pass, descending forested slopes, crossing tundra, climbing toward the plateau above Shivruai. On January 26th, temperatures dropped to around 24 degrees Celsius. Snow fell steadily, the wind stiffened. They pitched a tent in the woods, had supper and prepared for the next day's climb. Weather reports warned of worsening storm conditions. Despite that, they pressed on. Rather than rest in the forested valley and wait out worsening conditions, they climbed toward the plateau with the wind at their backs. They should have camped for the night before attempting that ridge. Their logs record little about that decision, no note of emergency. But the ascent exposed them to more wind, thinner air, harsher cold. Their gear was tested, their bodies strained. They gained the plateau late in the day as twilight weakened. Then something broke. In the night between January 27th and 28th, the group succumbed one by one to the cold. Later, search teams would discover their bodies over a period of months. The first 5 were recovered in February, 2 more in March, 2 in May, and finally the last in June. Their faces bore masks of horror, frozen in place, their eyes wide, their mouths slack. They were posed as if in final agony. In the official Soviet report, all 10 were declared to have died of hypothermia. No suspects were charged. What the autopsies revealed did little to calm speculation. There were no stab wounds, no skeletal breaks, nothing consistent with violent attack, but the bodies lay where they had fallen, on slopes, in snow, often fully clothed. In several cases, the bodies showed signs that garments had been rearranged, perhaps even exchanged. Some of their watches were stopped at different times, suggesting they died at staggered intervals. The watches imply that 3 of the group who moved into the valley survived longer than the 5 who remained on the plateau. The placement of the bodies is telling. 5 died atop or near the plateau, the others in lower valley terrain as though they descended or drifted downward. The plateau group may have collapsed first under exposure, leaving the others to struggle downward for hours. But why did they not stay grouped? Why did they not pitch tents lower in safer ground? Their diaries and photography offer fragments. Some film was later developed, revealing snow, hooded figures, the monotony of white slopes. In the group's mid-trip photos, laughter and smiles appear. They were confident. There is no captured moment of distress, no sudden tilt of horizon, no warning. The last images are ordinary. The move up in the evening was recorded in no special haste. There was no noted emergency. That suggests a collapse without warning. Weather data from the region confirms the risk. The Kola Peninsula is subject to winds funneling through mountain passes, gusts spiking unpredictably. A steady storm was underway. Snowfall, drifting snow, whiteouts, all combined to degrade visibility and lamplight. The wind could shift shade, weaken grip. In these conditions, a small error becomes dire. Analysts propose that the group may have split. Those stronger pressed ahead, those weaker lingered or turned back. The bodies in the valley may represent a separate cohort succumbing later. Their paths through deep snow may have been misjudged. They could have fallen through snow bridges or hidden gullies. Some may have become disoriented and collapsed mid-stride. In that terrain, minutes count. Another oddity is the masks on faces, the frozen expressions of terror. When bodies freeze rapidly, facial muscles lock mid-expression. But that suggests collapse during stress, sudden death. One theory is that some experienced pulmonary edema or sudden respiratory failure triggered panic and collapse. Pulmonary edema in extreme cold can flood lungs, suffocate rapidly. In Soviet cases of high-altitude climbers, cold-induced pulmonary edema is known. Some suggest the plateau's altitude may have triggered that in weakened lungs. If a few collapsed first, others may have been shocked by sudden death in their group, panicking. Clothing observations also puzzle. Most bodies were found fully clothed, unlike Dyatlov's hikers who were partially undressed. This argues against paradoxical undressing, but in several cases garments seemed swapped or mismatched. That suggests survivors used clothing from fallen comrades. That implies survivors had some orientation, some awareness of what was wrong. It also suggests movement after collapse. It is haunting that no footprints of other parties were found, only the group's own trail. No signs of rescue, no tracks suggesting chase or escape. Their route register matches only themselves. That removes suspicion of attack by people or animals. Local Sami folklore sometimes mentions foolishness of the north, a condition where travellers lose mental balance in a remote terrain. But folklore is not forensic evidence. Some Russian researchers have speculated that chemical exposure or radiation may have been a factor. In the Soviet era, some reporters claimed that hikers' bodies were buried in sealed coffins and missing eyeballs were asserted, though standard records do not support these claims. Others have pointed to the case's classification status. Documents remain sealed. These speculations are fringe, but they speak to the discomfort with a fully natural death in such odd posture. Because no immediate rescue was launched, decomposition, scavengers and snow shift affected evidence. By the time of retrieval, bodies had drifted into snow, tunnels had filled, terrain had changed. Interpretation is complicated. Some bodies were found under snowdrifts, others in open slope. Their actual collapse points may differ from recovery points. Today, enthusiasts and forensic hikers retrace that route. They model wind speed, snow load, visibility decline. They map likely collapse points, some test wind tunnel models. None reconstruct a simple scenario that fits all observed positions, watches, body states. Hypothermia remains the official cause, but the group's decisions remain perplexing. Why move upward late? Why not camp before exposure? Why split? Why linger? Shivroy stands as a lesser-known echo of Dyatlov. 10 people, winter snow, wind, fear, collapse. The evidence shows a group that gradually failed, rather than one struck by one catastrophe. The plateau route, though ambitious, likely overexposed them. Their final hours spoke in frozen bodies, silent eyes, still watches. The snow, wind and dark remain the only witnesses. Denmark expedition loss, 1906 to 1908 Nebraska, Greenland. They sailed north into lingering daylight, the Danmark creaking through pack ice, its crew eager for undiscovered fjords and blank maps. In the summer of 1906, the Danish Denmark expedition set course for Greenland's northeast coast, the last great unmapped stretch. Their ambition was not modest. Chart unknown coastline, test the Peary Channel hypothesis, gather meteorological, geological, and ethnographic data. The promise was full, the cost would be extreme. Upon arrival, the ship threaded through ice toward Germania land, where they established base camp and a meteorological station at what became known as Danmarkshavn. They unloaded gear, built housing, placed instruments, and staged sled depots for the upcoming sled journeys. Among the crew was the young Alfred Wegener, who conducted kite and balloon observations. The team divided itself. Some remained at base, others would push north by sled, laying down depots and mapping sections of coast. The strategy was clear: advance north along coastal ice, then return via inland routes if possible. By early 1907, sled teams departed north, supported by caches set early. They followed the coastline, mapped peninsulas, explored inlets, and pushed beyond prior limits. But the coast did not behave as expected. Fjords curved where charts predicted straight lines. Ice moved unpredictably. The lead group included expedition leader Ludvig Milius Eriksson, cartographer Niels Peter Høeg Hagen, and Greenlander sled driver Jørgen Bronlund. The others diverged. Johan Koch, Bertelsen and Gabrielsen aimed to map Peary Land to the north. At first, the split was manageable. Koch's party reached Cape Bridgman, verified Peary's northern claims, and returned to the ship successfully. Milius's group journeyed west along the coast toward Independence Fjord. They reached the head of Danmark Fjord, but the fjord was deeper than expected, a dead end. Rather than turn immediately, they lingered, trying to push onward, hoping to connect to previous known terrain. Time and supplies slipped away. When they finally realized the fjord would not lead to their target, they attempted a return. But conditions had changed. Open water cut across routes they had counted on. Coastal ice began to break. They were forced inland across the ice sheet late in the season with battered boots, worn gear, and dwindling food. Their dogs had been eliminated for sustenance. Their pace slowed. Their map sketches and diary entries captured frustration, broken sleds, torn skins, misalignment of coastline to their expectations. By October, Milius, Hagen, and Bronlund faced the interior ice. They turned away from coast toward Lambert Land. But the ice sheet is indifferent. Storms, cold, and exhaustion became their companions. Hagen grew weaker, his stride shortened. Milius kept him moving, but the strain was relentless. When the cold deepened, Hagen succumbed. He died in the Njögalfjötsbræ area in November 1907. Milius continued onward, but soon followed his comrade into death. By late November, he too perished. Alone, Bronlund pressed on. He recorded final movements in his diary. "I come here in moonlight, frost in my feet, cannot go on." He shielded himself in a small ice cave near Lambert Land. When spring came in March 1908, a rescue team found Bronlund's body in that cave, alongside his diary and Hagen's cartographic sketches. He had brought forward the map so that even in death the expedition would not fail entirely. Near him lay his final notes, a black smudge on the last diary page. Later chemical analysis revealed that the smudge contained burnt rubber, oils, petroleum, and human waste. A desperate attempt at ignition. He had likely tried to light a burner with whatever remains he could fashion before giving in to exposure and fatigue. The artifacts, the diary, the sketches, the maps, became indispensable evidence. Bronlund's last note gave an approximate location where he died. Hagen's sketches confirmed coastline details the expedition had discovered. Milius's own letters, later found in cairns and stone pyramids deposited by searchers, supplemented missing data. Together, these records allowed later scholars to reconstruct much of their final path, even if the bodies of Milius and Hagen were never recovered. Modern research has used satellite mapping and glacial flow models to estimate where Milius and Hagen might lie under ice, moved by centuries of drift. Some place them under deep snow, others suggest collapse or falling through crevasses moved them downward. The ice is dynamic. Any remains may shift or vanish under layers of accumulation. The core mystery is not only their deaths, but the choices that led there. Why linger in Danmark Fjord before turning inland? Why push deep into seasonally unstable zones? Their map suggested possible connections, but the cost was high. The open water, ice breakup, misread topography, all conspired. The depletion of provisions, damage to equipment, dog losses, and late timing made the return route tenuous. Bronlund's final hours hint at the human scale of collapse. He fought for days, weakening, his feet numb, his body starving. He located a shallow cave, continued writing as long as possible, tried to start a fire to warm himself, and then accepted fate. His death was quiet and alone, in darkness and cold. Yet his act of securing maps and leaving his last notes turned his end into evidence. The Denmark expedition is sometimes overshadowed by tragedy, but from a scientific view it was not a failure. The mapping of northeast Greenland's coast was largely completed. The charts produced were accurate, correcting prior assumptions such as the existence of Peary Channel. The expedition named new islands and fjords, collected climate data, and affirmed Danish sovereignty over Greenland's remote coast. The sacrifices of 3 men were high, but their legacy endured through maps and diaries. Differences in time left parts of their story forever blank. We do not know the precise collapses of Milius or Hagen nor their last steps. We cannot verify the exact spots they died. Only Bronlund's body, his diary and his courage remain as living testimony. In the changing ice of Greenland, their presence is partial, but the maps they left and the coastlines they disclose stand firm. Maps, diaries, sketches, chemical smudges, cairns, pyramids – these are the threads we use to stitch a story across ice and silence. Bronlund's smudge is perhaps the most intimate clue. A last struggle recorded in desperate marks. The coastline they charted, the hypotheses they tested, and the routes they took echo in Greenland's geography to this day. Italia airship crash and Amundsen's disappearance. 1928 Arctic. The radio crackled in a distant station, a desperate signal crossing ice and night. As word spread, the world's eyes shifted north. By late May 1928, the airship Italia, commanded by Umberto Nobile, had crashed on the fragile Arctic ice. What followed was a calamity not only of survival but of rescue, politics, rivalry, and the final disappearance of Roald Amundsen himself as he flew into the storm in a rescue mission. The Italia had departed Ny-Ålesund, Svalbard, on May 23rd, heading toward the North Pole. The mission was bold: scientific surveys, mapping, meteorology, and testing polar air navigation. The voyage had already faced trouble: engine faults, ice build-up, shifting winds. But by May 24th, they reached the pole itself. Flags were dropped onto the ice, and they turned back toward base. Strong headwinds, thick fog, and freezing conditions made the return perilous. The airship drifted east of planned course. On May 25th, disaster struck. As Italia flew low, ice accumulated, controls jammed, the elevator wheel locked. The ship pitched downward. Nobile ordered engines off and ballast dropped. The control car smashed onto the ice. The car and tail crashed. Parts of the envelope tore away and drifted skyward with crew still clinging. 10 crew were thrown to the ice. 6 remained carried aloft with the drifting gas bag, never found. 1 crewman aboard a detached section died. Others on the ice were shocked, injured. Nobile himself was wounded, with broken ribs, leg and arm, but survived. The survivors who lay on the ice gathered salvage, pulling what they could from wreckage: food, radio, tents, supplies. Chief among their actions was erecting what came to be known as the Red Tent. Designed by engineer Felice Trojani, it was made of raw and blue silk and constructed to be visible from the air. They moved equipment and damaged radios into it. Against cold wind and fractures, the tent became their fragile citadel on ice. It sheltered 9 people: Nobile, Sessioni, Biaggi, Trojani, Mariano, Viglieri, Zappi, Behunek, and Titina, the fox terrier. The radio became their lifeline. Giuseppe Biaggi fired the transmitter, sending SOS signals. The messages were fragmented: coordinates, pleas, health reports. Some signals drifted through noise, others were misinterpreted. The Italian base at Ny-Ålesund did not immediately pick them up. Instead, a Russian amateur operator, Nikolai Schmidt, received one of their distress signals and alerted operators in Europe. Over days, governments from Italy, Norway, Russia, France, and others launched rescue operations. Ships, icebreakers, airplanes mobilized in one of the largest polar rescue efforts in history. The first rescue attempt came from Sweden. On June 23rd, Swedish pilot Einar Lundborg landed on the ice and picked up Nobile and his fox terrier. The small plane could not take others safely, so only Nobile left. This decision sparked controversy. Many believed others should have been evacuated first. Lundborg attempted to return to the camp, but his plane crashed during the attempt, forced to wait with survivors until later rescue. Meanwhile, aircraft, ships, and icebreakers converged. The Soviet icebreaker Krasin would play a central role. It sailed north, breaking through pack ice, responding to coordinates. The French sent a Latham 47 flying boat piloted by René Guilbeault. In the high seas, Amundsen, ever the explorer, joined the rescue effort aboard the Latham. He had commanded the earlier Norge expedition with Nobile in 1926, and put aside prior tensions to help rescue the stranded Italians. On June 18th, The Latham 47 flew over ice channels and fjords toward the site, but in poor visibility and panic, it never returned. Amundsen, along with his Norwegian pilot Leif Dietrichson and 4 French crew, vanished over the Arctic Sea. Later, debris, a float, a gasoline tank, washed ashore near Tromsø, suggesting the plane crashed at sea, but no bodies ever returned. The disappearance of the great polar explorer during a rescue mission added a tragic echo to the entire saga. Back at the red tent, survivors waited, radioing status, rationing food, treating wounds, fashioning makeshift gear, and sending dye markers into the snow to guide overhead craft. They painted red lines in the snow using dye vials dropped earlier to assist visibility. Over weeks, drift shifted the ice. Their tent moved, weather battered them. Over nearly 40 days, crews advanced in blizzard, ice, darkness. Some aircraft crashed, some ships were delayed. Some rescuers became themselves stranded, needing rescue. On July 12th, the Crescent reached the ice floe and brought the survivors off the tundra. Not all were well, some injured, weakened, frostbitten, diseased, but the rescue was a moment of triumph. They were flown to Rome, met by crowds. The red tent, radio tents, and equipment were recovered. The tent itself was later donated to the city of Milan and exhibited as a symbol of survival and collaboration. Public reaction was immediate and divided. In Italy, Nobile was hailed a hero by some and blamed by others. Newspapers accused him of abandoning his crew by accepting evacuation first. He was investigated by Mussolini's regime, censured by sections of the military. The official inquiry debated command decisions, responsibility, timing, and failures in coordination. Nobile spent much of his life defending his conduct amid legend and criticism. In Norway and among polar communities, the disappearance of Amundsen became a wound. The man who had conquered both poles had vanished while aiding others. The Latham rescue flight's failure haunted future planning. Later searches in 2004 and 2009, using submarines to scan the Barents seafloor near Tromsø, revealed nothing. His remains, his aircraft, lay lost beneath dark Arctic water. The rescue operations themselves became stories of heroism, miscalculation, and failure. Some aircraft reported spotting dye signals. Others crashed in storms. Ships damaged by ice pushed onward. Some rescue teams carried supplies to drifting ice. Timing, weather, politics all intervened. The international effort had to coordinate among Italian, Norwegian, Russian, French, Swedish, Finnish units, each with varying protocols and capabilities. Delay was constant enemy. In the months after return, Italy held public funerals, awards were given, and blame was assigned. Nobile's reputation lingered in shadow. Praised for survival and rescue, yet accused of leaving others behind. Amundsen's disappearance became legendary. In later years, mountaineers and polar researchers invoked the story as caution and inspiration. The Italia crash and subsequent saga stand as more than a lost air mission. It became a stage where exploration, nationalism, politics, heroism, and tragedy intertwined. The drift of radio waves, the crackle of communication across ice, the race of ships and aircraft, and the final loss of a legendary explorer, all echo across decades. The red tent remains a potent symbol, the crash site long lost under shifting ice. Amundsen's silence in the sea still sobers. The Arctic, again, has swallowed voices. Percy Fawcett, 1925 Amazon. He carried a compass, maps, dreams, and a stubborn insistence that an ancient city lay hidden beneath the jungle canopy. Percy Harrison Fawcett left civilization behind in April 1925, heading into the Brazilian rainforest, his eldest son Jack and Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel at his side. They called the city Zer, a name Fawcett coined for what others dismissed as myth. But by late May, they vanished. No bodies returned. Their last camp, called Dead Horse Camp, became a waypoint between ambition and silence. From 1906 onward, Fawcett had led numerous expeditions across the Amazon basin, mapping rivers, gathering ethnographic data, chasing rumours of lost civilizations. He was disciplined and obsessive, convinced that remote ruins, including the legendary manuscript 512, a Portuguese colonial text describing a lost city, hinted that the Amazon once hosted complex societies. He believed Z might lie near the headwaters of the Xingu or in Mato Grosso. His prior journeys had given him confidence, but the forest is implacable. By 1925, Fawcett had secured financial support and assembled a small party. himself, his son Jack, and Raleigh Rimmel. They intended to carry minimal supplies, move quickly, rely on local knowledge. On April 20th, they departed Cuiaba, heading northwest. They travelled on rivers, then inland toward the upper Xingu Basin. Along the way, Fawcett penned letters to his wife, hinting at the challenges ahead but also affirming resolve. On May 29th, he sent a final letter from Dead Horse Camp with coordinates, saying they were ready to press into unexplored territory with just the 3 men. No further message arrived. After that, the forest swallowed them. The Brazilian government, explorers and amateurs mounted dozens of search missions. Some reported glimpses of bones, rusted tools, signs of camps or local oral stories. In 1927, a nameplate bearing Fawcett's name turned up among a local tribe. A theodolite compass once belonging to him was discovered in a village near the border of Mato Grosso, but both finds were ambiguous. The nameplate may have come from an earlier expedition. The compass had been used before his final push. Neither was definitive proof of death. Local tribes passed down oral traditions. The Kalapalo, whose ancestral land bordered Fawcett's intended route, claimed to have seen smoke from his campfires for 5 nights. On the 5th night, the fires stopped. The villagers later claimed that indigenous fierce people lay east of their area, and that Fawcett had ignored warnings and proceeded toward that territory. They told that the departing men did not carry gifts. Some speculate they were attacked. But oral history, especially passed over generations, is partial. Still, it is a rare echo in that silence. In 2005, journalist David Gran retraced much of Fawcett's route, interviewing tribe elders and mapping possible paths. Gran visited Kalapalo communities who insisted that Fawcett and his 2 companions left their village, walked eastward, and were seen no more. They reported 5 fires before extinction. Gran also explored archaeological remains at a site called Kuhikugu, deep in the Xingu. He found evidence of advanced settlements, mounds, defensive walls, roads, plazas, features of a complex society. These discoveries suggest Fawcett might not have been entirely wrong about Zeh, but the ruins were flooded, overgrown, far from Fawcett's predicted path. Still, no remains of Fawcett, Jack, or Rimmel were ever confirmed. Skeletons misattributed have been rejected after dental and anatomical comparisons. No grave marker has survived. The disappearance remains a pure vanish point. Time and foliage erased them. The jungle consumes wood, rusts metal, obscures footprints. In the equatorial heat, human bones disintegrate. Without a durable marker or monument, the forest took all. Each failed search added fragments to the puzzle. In 1933, a compass surfaced among the Basuri Indians of Mato Grosso. It bore Fawcett's signature, but the tribe said it had been acquired earlier. In later decades, expeditions reported possible human remains in rivers and caves, but tests did not match known Fawcett data. Some explorers believed they found clothing remnants, but analysis was inconclusive. The distances, curves, terrain variations all make tracing Fawcett's final line of walk extremely difficult. Some theories place their deaths by disease, malaria, parasites, fungal infections common in the Amazon. Others suggest starvation, loss of supplies, wrong jungle plants eaten. Jaguars, caimans, venomous snakes, hostile tribes, each is a hazard. One scenario, the 3 men broke into hostile territory and were killed. Another, they succumbed to illness or hunger and died quietly. Another more speculative theory. Fawcett, in his mystical thought, withdrew purposefully into tribes, lived anonymously. That theory is popular in fiction but lacks credible evidence. Fawcett's legacy, however, lives in maps, writings, and ruins. His published books, Exploration Fawcett, Lost Trails, Lost Cities, offered observational and ethnographic notes. His prior Amazon surveys improved understanding of rivers and ecology. His efforts encouraged later archaeological and lidar studies that have uncovered traces of pre-Columbian complexity in Amazonia. The concept of Zed, once dismissed as fantasy, now sits beside evidence that the Amazon housed large, organized societies. In recent years, LiDAR scanning and remote sensing have revealed buried earthworks, roads, terraces deep under rainforest. Some align with indigenous oral memory, possibly echoing Z-like settlements. While no direct link to Fawcett's path has been confirmed, these findings validate the core idea that the jungle hides more than small villages. They hint that what Fawcett sought may have existed, though not in the form he imagined. The mystery of Fawcett's final journey remains unclosed. The vanishing point is the jungle itself. The fragments of evidence, maps, orals, archaeological ruins, a compass here, a nameplate there, offer suggestions. They allow hypothesis but not confirmation. The forest holds its silence tightly. At each turn, Fawcett stepped deeper into opacity. When future expeditions penetrate further, combining satellite imagery, LiDAR, DNA testing, carbon dating, and collaboration with local communities, perhaps more traces will emerge. Perhaps a bone, a tool, an inscription will surface. Until then, Fawcett and his companions remain absent. Their story is a borderlands between history and myth, a human penumbra cast across the Amazon's green depth. Ludwig Leichhardt, 1848 Australia. They paraded through Melbourne in August 1860, their flags raised, camels in harness, horses and wagons piled with supplies. 19 men set out on what was billed the Victorian Exploring Expedition under Robert O'Hara Burke. Their goal, cross a continent. By early 1861, 9 men would reach the Gulf of Carpentaria. By late 1861, 7 would have died, 1 would return, and their story would become legend. From the outset, mistakes shadowed ambition. Burke was chosen by committee vote, despite little experience exploring wild land. Wills, the surveyor and astronomer, was more seasoned in frontier work. The supply train left Melbourne on August 20th under fanfare. 26 camels, 23 horses, 6 wagons. The tracks were muddy, roads broken, delays mounted from the first days. Already the margin for error was slim. They reached Menindee at the Darling River in October. Burke split the party. He selected the fittest men, camels and horses, and pushed ahead toward Cooper Creek, planning for Wright and the rest to follow later. Wills, Gray, King and Burke made that push, leaving behind surplus gear and trusting that the others would catch up. The strategy was bold but dangerous. If support failed, the forward party would be vulnerable. On November 11th, the advance reached what they believed was Cooper Creek. They began building Depot Camp Luskthru. Wills went on a reconnaissance northwards, lost 3 camels in flood, and returned. Meanwhile, rats infested one of the camps. They moved their depot downstream, establishing Camp Liftfeet, known forever as Camp 65 or Fort Wills. Supplies were buried, messages carved into trees, routes planned. The advance party prepared to push to the Gulf. Buoyed by maps and recent rains, Burke decided on December 16th to go north with Wills, Charles Gray, and John King. They packed minimal supplies for 3 months. Meanwhile, William Braher, in charge of Camp 65, was ordered to wait 3 months for the return party. Wills is believed to have secretly instructed Braher to wait a 4th month. Better safe than sorry. The group departed, hoping to return before supplies failed. Their northbound journey encountered both promise and peril. Rains had made rivers navigable and soil soft. Aboriginal guides assisted. Terrain offered surprises. They reached Camp Siksikakinks on the Binnow River by February, at the Gulf's fringe. But the coastline was swampy, mangrove-choked, impassable. They may have glimpsed open sea, but they didn't quite set foot on it for proof. Supplies were exhausted. They returned to their base camp once more at Camp 119, rejoined King and Gray, and turned their wheels south on February 13th. The return journey was cruel. Monsoonal rains soaked the land. Camels dropped. Horses died. They ate their pack animals. Supplies weakened. Gray caught dysentery, and Wills and Burke weakened with him. On April 4th, they shot their only horse. Gray grew worse. On April 17th, he died at a place called Polygonum Swamp, commonly thought to be near Lake Massacre. Burke and Wills buried him, then headed on with King. On April 21st, the trio returned to Camp 65. They arrived that evening to find it deserted. Brahe had departed hours earlier. Burke and Wills missed their team by only 9 hours. They dug up the buried supplies and read Brahe's message carved in the dig tree, noting departure and cache location. With little energy left, they rested 2 days, then made a fateful decision. Instead of retracing their outward path, Burke insisted on heading southwest toward Mount Hopeless, where help might await. Wills and King expressed doubts, but the push began. Their last days were desperate. Starvation, dehydration, sickness, nature's brutality converged. Wills grew too weak to continue by June 29th. Burke and King left him at Brearley Waterhole with food and water. Burke and King tried to press on upstream for 2 more days, then Burke collapsed. His last moments were witnessed only by King. Burke died with his pistol loaded and capped in hand. King stayed by his side, then, when strength allowed, buried Wills, trekked back to the waterhole and remained. King survived, weakened, until September 1861, when relief parties found him living with the Yandrawunda Aboriginal people, who had provided him food, shelter and asylum. The rescue came from Howitt's expedition, which also recovered the remains of Burke and Wills, returning them to Melbourne for state funerals. The mission had ended in tragedy, but also in public reckoning and myth. Investigations followed. A commission of inquiry convened in Melbourne in November 1861 to assign responsibility. The commission faulted Burke for leaving Camp 65 before his return and for pushing forward prematurely. It called Wright's delays reprehensible and saw Brahe as constrained by injuries and supplies. But the lines of blame were tangled with political, personal, and institutional biases. Some argued the commission favoured prominent figures, softening critique of men like Burke. In later years, scholars reinterpreted the evidence. Some blamed mismanagement and underestimation of the land. Burke insisted advance too soon, Wills had cautioned delay. Wright's late supply team may have doomed the return. Others pointed to the tragedy of the Nardoo, a native seed eaten by Burke's party in raw or unprocessed form, which may have impaired their nutrition or absorbed water, worsening dehydration. Debate lingers whether the explorers starved, dehydrated, or died from vitamin deficiency like beriberi or scurvy. The National Museum of Australia holds objects from the journey: Burke's water bottle, Brahe's breastplate awarded to Aboriginal helpers, maps, diaries. These artefacts anchor memory to physical reality. They link gallery visitors to the dust and dread of the interior. The landscapes they crossed became better known and more open to settlement. The tragedy paradoxically contributed to understanding of inland Australia. In time, the expedition's narrative evolved from failure into legend, heroic folly, cautionary tale, human reckoning. Monuments, paintings, diaries and literature immortalised the crossing. Some modern historians temper romanticism with critique. Foolish timing, overreach, lack of local knowledge, arrogance of command. The legacy remains unsettled. Each generation rereads their choices with new eyes. As we move forward into other expeditions meeting silence, Burke and Wills stands as a raw echo, crossing distances, then collapsing under their own hopes. The maps they produced, the lives they lost, the artefacts they left. They frame the line between heroic ambition and tragedy's quiet claim. Boardman and Tasker, 1982 Everest. They climbed together through noise and cold, threading ice bands and narrow ridges, driven by ambition and partnership. In May 1982, British climbers Peter Boardman and Joe Tasker set out to climb Everest by its elusive northeast ridge, an unclimbed route. They vanished, leaving only fragments, bits of climbing gear, ropes, scattered footprints, and shadows of what might have been. The mountain took their final step. Boardman had already made solo attempts on Everest, including the North Face's super difficult Cobra Point. Tasker was known for bold alpine-style climbs in the Garhwal and Karakoram. They partnered for this northeast ridge attempt in part because the route had long teased climbers. Steep wall faces, corniced ridges, logistical complexity, minimal precedent. In April 1982, in base camp on the north side, they assembled permits, tactics, oxygen sets, food and gear. Their plan? Set intermediate camps, climb the ridge in alpine-style pushes, and if possible traverse the ridge toward the summit and descend the north face. They left base camp on May 17th carrying minimal loads. They spent days fixing ropes, acclimatizing, ferrying supplies. They set Camp 2 at roughly 7,200 metres. From there, they hoped to push upward into the ridge's steep sections. Communication between camps was intermittent, radios fractious, weather interfering. On May 20th, they radioed that conditions were uncertain. Wind, snow, cornices making progress slow. They reported one rope break and that they would press ahead cautiously. Then their signal was lost. Weeks passed. Search parties scoured the northeast ridge, the north face and surrounding lines. Small fragments appeared, a boot, a line of rope about 200 metres below the ridge's crest, a tent flap. The boot was identified as Tasker's. Another rope was traced to Boardman's set. There was no body, no camp, no survivors. The fragments were frozen relics, tools, slivers of gear, scattered across steep terrain. Nothing trusted enough to reconstruct a final position. The boot's position suggested they passed the ridge crest, but the rope fragment lower down suggests a fall on descent. That duality is central. Maybe they summited, then fell on their way down. Or maybe they fell before the top. If they summited, it would mean Boardman and Tasker stood above Everest's rock and wind, then plunged downward. If not, they perished amid slopes too steep to salvage. Analysts looked at wind patterns, snow accumulation, exposure, and roped travel. The northeast ridge has extended steep sections, narrow snow ridges, and mixed rock and ice. Cornices overhang, avalanche risk lurks. One fall may have pulled the other. Rope jerk fractures, snapped gear, or avalanche dislodgement could have sent them over. If one slipped, the force could pull the other. The fragment suggests sudden force, not gradual collapse. Climbing partners from other expeditions studied their route. Some believe they made the summit, sighting the boot higher than for any fragment or the lines of rope fixed upward. Others counter that their gear was inadequate for descent from that ridge. After summit push, exhausted they may have lacked energy. The absence of oxygen logs or summit photos weakens the summit argument. No bodies have been found despite targeted searches over decades. The high altitude, extreme erosion, seasonal snow scour and rockfall degrade evidence over time. A body might fall into a crevasse, be buried under avalanches, or be carried downhill by ice. Under these conditions, fragments like boots and rope may survive longer at higher exposure than bodies. This is a classic vanish point, disappearance without final locus. Later expeditions retrace sections of their intended route. In 1995, a team found Boardman's shoulder length of handmade piton. In 2011, a Chinese team claimed to find a placard with Boardman's name etched near a ridge segment. The authenticity is debated. These finds hint at positions but lack conclusive detail. Their utility is in anchoring paths, not telling the last seconds. In 2002, an Everest Memorial Service included a plaque listing Boardman and Tasker. Their names sit among those lost on Everest. Lists catalogue missing climbers as part of the mountain's ledger. But their remains are not present. Their graves are in air and ice. Their memory is held in trace bits and remembrances. Mountaineers debate. Did they push too high, too fast? Did route choice expose them to insurmountable descent? Did one mistake doom both? Was it exhaustion, altitude, wind, or a slip? The timeline is slim. Radio silence after May 20th, no further contact. They were likely lost that day or the next, but no record remains. The vanish point of Boardman and Tasker sits on that ridge, above 8,000 metres, in faint wind tracks and fading rope knots. Their ambition remains intact even in loss, to conquer a ridge never climbed before. Their fragments offer hints but not full stories. Their route remains unclimbed in full by many. Their spirit lingers in the ridge's silhouette and in climbing journals, map lines left incomplete. To future climbers, that ridge is both challenge and warning. To historians, the fragments are whispers. A boot there, a rope here, no body, no closure. The mountain took them, and the ridge swallowed their steps. Their disappearance is a note in Everest's endless repertoire of loss. Naomi Wamura, 1984, Denali. A single radio breath in the high air, I've reached the top. It was February 13th, 1984, and Naomi Wamura spoke to photographers overhead, announcing he had summited Denali alone in winter. But when other climbers scoured the slopes days later, they found no body, only a snow cave, gear, fading journals, and the mountain kept his final step hidden. He was already legendary. Wamura from Japan had soloed Everest, crossed Greenland, rafted the Amazon, and tackled many of the world's peaks. He'd climbed Denali before, but never in winter, alone. The odds were enormous. He set off in early February 1984, ascending via the West Buttress route. He carried light loads, planned snow caves instead of tents, and carried limited fuel and cold food rations. He was counting on precision, self-reliance, endurance. Wamura pressed upward through snowstorms, crevasse fields, wind and darkness. At around 4,300 m, he sheltered in a snow cave. Later searchers would find his diary in that cave, pages describing his strategy, weather, fatigue, and optimism. He noted removing heavier gear to lighten weight for the summit push. He left his self-rescue bamboo poles at lower camps, assuming he had passed the more dangerous glacier areas. He moved on, facing thinner air, colder wind, and the steep headwall near the final ridge. By February 12th, he apparently reached the summit, or so he reported over radio. He told his contacts he was descending, heading toward a high camp at 18,000 feet, about 5,500 m. That was the last confirmed communication. The next day he was spotted by a bush pilot at roughly 16,800 feet, still on the mountain but descending. After that, silence dropped across slopes and sky. Search airplanes crisscrossed, but visibility, storms and drifting snow made sightings rare. On February 20th, skies cleared and ground teams began formal search. 2 experienced climbers were dropped at about 14,000 feet. They stayed until February 26th, combing ridgelines, scanning avalanche slopes, probing crevasses. They located the snow cave at 14,000 feet where his diary had been found, but no sign of Uemura beyond that. The campsite at 16,600 feet showed no disturbance. The caches and equipment that other climbers had left remained untouched. In that cave, the diary became a key artifact. Its entries described crevasse falls, minus 40 degrees Celsius cold, frozen food, exhaustion. He wrote of singing songs to himself, trying to stay mentally strong. In the last pages he lamented, "I wish I could sleep in a warm sleeping bag. No matter what happens, I'm going to climb McKinley." The diary shows courage, clarity, determination, but also limits. The trail forward from that cave is unmarked. Mountaineering analysts looked at his route, wind maps, terrain. The steep headwall above 16,000 feet is treacherous. Broken rock, ice overhangs, hidden crevasses. A single slip there can drop into deep snow bridges or cracks. One prevailing theory is that Uemura fell during descent. He may have summited, but in exhaustion or twilight slipped, broke through snow load, and tumbled into a crevasse. The body could remain buried under snow, carried by avalanche, or carried downward by ice flow. Others speculate he never truly summited. To radio operators, the summit report may have been wishful. He might have turned near 16,800 feet and begun descent. If so, his fall could have occurred mid-ridge, and he would have had little chance. Gear left behind, no sign of struggle, no footprints beyond that point, all suggest a vanish point, not a clear fatal locus. The cold, wind and snow erased his final steps. Search efforts didn't stop there. Japanese climbing teams mounted expeditions in later years, following Uemura's path, probing crevasses, checking ice trenches, examining old campsites. In 1984, gear known to belong to him was found near 17,200 feet, consistent with his supply line, but no remains. Some think his body lies under ice or rockfall unreachable without extreme risk. His equipment fragments endure where bodies cannot. Public reaction in Japan and abroad was intense. Uemura was a national icon. Newspapers printed his last radio lines. Memorials were held. His alma mater and government recognized his courage. His disappearance became part of mountaineering lore, an ultimate test of a solo climber's limits. Even today, Uemura's name prompts reverence. The route he tried is rarely repeated in winter. Climbers reference his risk, design, and mistakes. Explorers study his diary pages, his load decisions, his route choices. They map the headwall, simulate slip models, test wind speeds, temperature gradients. His vanish point is a subject of analysis in technical papers. To families of climbers missing, Uemura's case appears tragic but familiar. The line between success and vanishing is thin at extreme altitude. Enough time passes, snow shifts, bodies move, and the mountain erases human trace. Yet the artifacts, diaries, radio transcripts, scattered gear persist. They anchor him in memory even if his flesh is lost. Uemura's disappearance blends 2 patterns, vanish point and rescue echo. There was an immediate scramble, radio, aircraft, searchers, but no rescue party could reach him in time under extreme winter conditions. The echo of his voice on radio, his presence in the cave, his absence beyond, those are testimonies. His memory is kept by explorers and in mountaineering archives. Naomi Uemura stands among those whose final hour is lost to cold and snow. The mountains swallowed him, but the artifacts, voices and maps that remain keep pursuing his path. Jean-Christophe Lafay, 2006 Makalu winter. He spoke last in the thin air, his voice crackling over a satellite link. "I'm going for the summit. That message came from 7,600 metres on Makalu on January 27, 2006, and after that whisper, silence swallowed him. Jean-Christophe Lafay, solo on Winter Makalu, vanished into ice and wind. The mountain swallowed his final step. Lafay had long pushed extremes. By 2006, he had climbed 11 of the 14 8,000ers, many solo, many without supplemental oxygen. Makalu, the world's fifth highest peak, was one of the few he had not yet conquered. He planned a first solo winter ascent, a mission rife with danger but irresistible to him. In December 2005, he began bringing loads up from base camp at 5,300 metres, alone. He stockpiled gear, carried fuel, food, spare parts, all by himself, day by day, higher and higher. As the weeks passed, he made structure camps at 6,000 m and 6,900 m, pushing supplies upward, ferrying material carefully across crevasse zones. He battled storms that destroyed his tent and twice nearly blew him off the mountain. In those setbacks he retreated, regrouped, patched gear, and waited. When weather windows improved, he moved up again. On January 24, 2006, he departed for the high push. His only contact, a satellite phone to his wife, Katia, several times daily, with updates on sky, wind, frost. On January 26th, he arrived at a small ledge around 7,600 m, a high camp near the summit's lower slopes. From there, he sent his last direct report. He planned to head up that night. The forecast allowed for summit winds of 40 to 50 kilometers per h, cold around 30 degrees Celsius, and thin air. Despite fatigue and poor sleep, he said he felt strong enough for the final leg. That night, he departed into darkness, alone and exposed. Morning came. No new call, no message. The camp below waited. On February 4th, a helicopter reached as high as 7,000 m to search. Lafay's wife, with Vika Gustafsson and others, flew over, scanning ridges. They located a small red tent near 7,600 m, the last known camp, but no sign of the climber. The terrain was jagged, ice-scarred, crevassed. Snowdrift masked detail. No tracks were visible, no body lay in view. The rescue could not ascend further. Weather and altitude barred pursuit. The last known position of Lafay is that high ledge, or just above it. His journey ends at the boundary between human trace and mountain mystery. With no body, no rope track, no broken gear left behind to tell the fall, his disappearance is a vanish point, a place where path ends and shadow begins. Analysts studied route and conditions. The final slope above 7,600 m near Makalu's summit ridge is steep and exposed, laced with hidden crevasses beneath snow bridges. A slip into one could drag a climber past rescue, vanish into a chasm. Gustafsson, who'd climbed Makalu before, believed Lafay fell into one of the many crevasses he himself had noted in his own ascent, and that Lafay became trapped or fell silently. The red tent is itself a clue. Its position suggests that Lafay intended to summit from that ledge, but its intact or partial condition raises questions. Had he stepped out and never returned? Or was the tent itself dragged or buried by wind or avalanche? No communication succeeded after his departure. The worst case, he passed the tent and was lost just beyond it. The layout of the ledge and the slope beyond makes it plausible that even a shortfall could cross lines of forces that pull downward and sideways. The rescue echo continues. In subsequent years, teams retraced routes, probed crevasse fields, studied snow stability, mapped possible fall paths, and flew, walked, climbed. In 2006, the American Alpine Journal published a detailed accident report summarizing the push, the weather, and possible outcomes. The report noted he set out early, when light was minimal, fatigue high, and oxygen none. They implied that timing compounded risk. No subsequent usable evidence emerged. Arguments swirl. Did Lafay summit? Some claim that the summit was within reach. Others argue he never crossed snow cornices beyond the tent. With no signal after that last call, no photo, no descent report, the summit question remains unanswered. The vanish point allows both sides. Several variables complicate this disappearance. First, winter conditions extreme: temperature, wind, snowdrift. Second, route complexity: ridgelines converge, crevasses hide, cornices overhang. Third, human limits: fatigue, cold, cognitive delay. Fourth, solo risk: no partner to catch, no second set of eyes. Lafaille was alone in each step after leaving his high ledge. The rescue echo lingers. His voice last heard over a phone. The red tent broadcast his position. The helicopter search over adjacent routes. The silent ridgelines scanned again and again. Each echo reaches up to the boundary where altitude stops rescue. Above that, no human party could safely search. Nature holds the higher slopes. His wife, family and climbing community held memorials. Articles in mountaineering journals reviewed his life and disappearance. In climber forums and discussions, his case is cited as one of the highest solo attempts lost in winter. In expedition history, he is sometimes juxtaposed with other solo disappears in winter Himalaya. Each time his name recurs, the vanish point is retold. From 7,600 m, he stepped into silence. The artifacts in this case are only the tent, his satellite call logs, base camp notes, wind forecasts, route maps. They are cryptic. They offer position and intention, but not the collapse. They anchor a memory rather than a body. They keep Lafaille in the archive of climbers whose final moment lies beyond recovery. The silence at high altitude is thick. No footsteps, no body, no broken tool loudly present itself. The mountain erases. Over time, snow layers bury evidence. Serrat collapse shifts terrain, ice flow migrates debris. Even if remains exist, they may lie under kilometers of snow or rock, unreachable by human teams. The vanish point spans time. Lafaille's disappearance ranks among those like Mallory, Boardman and Tusker Wimura, where ambition meets vanishing. His name speaks of daring and loss. His memory is prescribed to maps, journals, last calls, and mountaineers' debates. Makalu's winter remains one of the purest high-altitude mysteries. Donald Crowhurst, 1969 Golden Globe race. He left shore with cautious hope aboard a small trimaran named Teignmouth Electron in October 1968 to sail solo, non-stop around the world. The Sunday Times Golden Globe race demanded courage, stamina, and skill. Donald Crowhurst believed he had all three, but soon the sea and mind would challenge him in ways he never anticipated. From the start, things were off. The Electron was underbuilt. The fiberglass hull had gaps, hatches leaked. Soon after leaving Teignmouth, seawater began to seep in. Crowhurst lacked a spare hose that would have allowed pumped drainage. The vessel took on water, and self-steering mechanisms failed. Despite these problems, he continued. He crossed the Atlantic, laboured south, but progress was slow and inconsistent. By early December, pressured by finances and expectations, he chose a dark path. He began falsifying his course reports. He was not heading down the Southern Ocean as required. Instead, he stayed in the Southern Atlantic. He reported positions he could not reach. He invented miles sailed, gave himself fast daily runs, sometimes triple actual distances, to stay competitive. To maintain consistency, he maintained 2 logs, one real, one fictitious. In the fake log, he plotted headings, weather, latitudes and longitudes that told a convincing round-the-world story. In his true log, he recorded the slow drift, the leaks, the fear. He studied weather forecasts and reverse-calculated positions to make his false logs plausible. As he drifted, his mind cracked. The logs become a window into the collapse. Between May and June 1969, entries shift from navigational detail to philosophical shifts. Erratic ruminations, stream of consciousness passages about time, identity, transcendence. He argued that he should transcend his mortal body, that fate would allow a split between mind and vessel. He composed a final confession. It is finished. It is the mercy. That last log entry is dated July 1st, 1969. In radio transmissions, one hears only fragments, periodic progress reports, vague coordinates, then silence. On June 29th, his last radio message spoke in Morse. After that, the Gazetta voice stilled. On July 10th, the Teignmouth Electron was found adrift in the Atlantic. No life aboard. The boat still had cooking equipment, logbooks, intact structure. Inside lay his true logs, his philosophical manifesto, and navigational records. His false logs were believed discarded or gone. The chronometer was missing. The boat showed no sign of collision, storm damage, or external force, no torn sails. The occupant had simply vanished. The logbooks are central evidence. They show his doubling of identity, one path of real coordinates drifting slowly through the Atlantic, and one fictitious mapping of a heroic circumnavigation. The real logs contain notes of stress, repairs, doubled efforts, water ingress, radio problems. The false logs record miles sailed, progress rounds of Cape Good Hope, attempts to dodge storms. As he neared the end of his hoax, the false log became dominant. He began to align the fake position with his real one to give the illusion of legitimacy at the final stages. But the performance required further manipulation and deeper lying. Psychologists later examined his final logs and conclude that the tension between real and false narratives created a split in his mind. The secrecy, the moral conflict, the financial pressure, the physical isolation, all conspired. The logs become a map of disintegration. They show how he oscillated between hope and despair, between continuation and confession, between being found and vanishing. They show weighing the possible outcome of exposure versus continuing the lie to the end. No physical trace of Crowhurst himself was ever found. No body, no remains. The Atlantic swallowed him. The vanish point is the sea itself. One moment he was aboard his craft, the next he was gone. He may have jumped or fallen or intentionally stepped overboard. The absence of signs on the boat suggests he abandoned it deliberately. The absence of damage, struggle, or waves crashing against sidewalls suggests nothing sudden. Perhaps he set sail to drift until the final moment and slipped quietly off. The vanish point here is deep water, not mountain ridges or frozen slopes, but open sea. The absence of human body in a watery mass is common over time. Corpses sink, decompose, are consumed by marine activity, or are carried away by currents. A man lost at sea often vanishes completely, leaving no remains. The drift of the Electron was itself evidence. The boat's course and speed match a slow drift with wind, current, no human correction. It was left to drift, untended. The rescue echo occurred, though belated. When the boat was found, reports raced. The press demanded answers. Crowhurst's family was informed. His logs were analysed by Craig Rich, the Sunday Times navigation advisor, who unearthed the deception by comparing celestial observations, weather forecasts, and inconsistencies in his log entries. He concluded the boat never left the Atlantic proper, that the circumnavigation was a ruse. Rich's reconstruction unravelled the fiction. His findings changed public perception. Crowhurst was not just a hoaxer, but a tragic figure overwhelmed. As analysis spread, books were written, The Strange Last Voyage of Donald Crowhurst, documentaries produced, debates heated. His story became a cautionary tale of ambition unmoored, the sea's cruelty, and the thin line between explorer and lost soul. The media echoed not just his fraud, but his psychological collapse. He became both villain and martyr in maritime law. In the Library of Exploration Failures, Crowhurst's case stands distinct. He disappeared not by physical disaster, but through self-constructed illusion and collapse. The evidence is mental and textual, less physical. His vanish point lies in the Atlantic night. His logs are both map and confession. His boat remains ghostly in history. The sea owns him. Carluck, Canadian Arctic Expedition, 1913-14. They sailed north under a hopeful flag, maps in hand, scientists ready, instruments set, believing the Arctic's secrets lay ahead. In 1913, the Canadian Arctic Expedition launched its flagship Carluck towards Herschel Island, aiming to chart unknown waters and claim space for Canada. But the sea had other plans, and the ship became the stage for one of the thorniest Arctic mysteries of survival, leadership, and drift. Carluck departed Esquimalt, British Columbia, on June 17, 1913. The vessel was a former whaler, refitted and strengthened with ironwood plating, but always vulnerable to ice stress. Early on, engine troubles and leaking hull plates caused concern. Despite misgivings from Captain Robert Bartlett, expedition leader Vilhjalmur Stephenson pressed ahead toward Nome, Alaska, en route to Herschel Island, where the ships of the expedition would rendezvous. In July, Carluck reached Nome. There the crew refitted, loaded provisions, and prepared for the final sail into the Beaufort Sea. Tensions simmered. Some scientists questioned Stephenson's tight grip and eventual secrecy over Northern versus Southern Party command. Despite unease, they headed north. By August 13th, she became trapped in pack ice about 200 miles from Herschel. The ice would hold her fast and carry her west. As summer light dimmed, the ice tightened. By September, the floe was moving. Stephenson, worried about meat shortages, left aboard a small hunting party. 5 men with dogs, supplies, a plan to find game and return in 10 days. But while they walked away, the ice drifted Karlak far to the west. Stephenson's party was separated from the ship, unable to return. Drift had begun in earnest. Ice pressure crept in. Over months, the Karlak strained under shifting flows. Bartlett ordered the crew to lighten the ship, removing snow, stores, gear. But the strain was relentless. On January 10, 1914, a loud shudder ran through the timber. A crack opened in the hull, pumps could not keep up. The crew had prepared well. Stores, shelters, supplies transferred to the ice. The next day, January 11th, Bartlett played Chopin's funeral march on the ship's Victrola and stepped onto the ice. The Karlak sank within minutes. More than 20 men, Inuit, supplies, dogs and a cat found themselves on ice floes. Bartlett organised shipwreck camp, building igloo shelters, kitchens from salvaged wood and a secure perimeter. They stocked up, organised hunting and resolved to survive the drift. The ice took them west toward Wrangel Island, about 80 miles distant. It was a brutal alignment of strategy, personalities and Arctic force. Late in January, 4 men asked to leave the camp and try to reach land independently. Bartlett gave them gear and supplies, but sternly had them sign a letter absolving him of blame. They departed February 5th, refusing rescue attempts. Their last glimpses, struggling in the ice, discarding gear, walking into the void. Later, only a sailor's scarf was found in an ice floe. The 4 vanished. Meanwhile, Bartlett led the main party with scientists, crew and Inuit toward Wrangel Island by dog sledge. The ice camp drifted. Days were short, food was rationed, morale waned. 3 men died after reaching the island, 2 of illness, 1 under violent circumstances. Disputes over food sharing, accusations of hiding supplies, and friction among members exacerbated the physical hardship. The Inuit among them had more knowledge of polar survival, and sometimes took leadership roles in hunts and ice navigation. Bartlett judged that only a small party should attempt reaching the Siberian coast for help. In March 1914, he and Inuit hunter Kataktovik set out across broken ice towards Siberia. Their route was grueling, shifting sea ice, open leads, variable snow and fatigue. After weeks they reached the mainland and safety. Bartlett made his way to Nome by May, eventually boarding the revenue cutter Bear. He then led the rescue mission back to Wrangel Island, arriving in August to retrieve the survivors. When rescue came, 17 men remained alive. They boarded Bear and returned. Survivors included Bartlett, scientists, crew and Inuit. 11 had died, some in the drift, some on the island, some on controversial fractures leaving the group. Stevens and McKay's groups that had split from the main party likely perished without trace. Their footprints vanished in vast ice fields. The leadership controversies that followed still echo. Stephenson was criticised for leaving the ship when it was still capable of moving, without clear contingency for the drifting vessel or stranded crew. He never returned to the ice until some years later. Some survivors saw his departure as abandonment. Bartlett too was examined. Should he have pushed for more aggressive marches? Should he have prevented the splinter parties? An Admiralty commission censured him for taking Karlak into dangerous ice and for letting Mackay's party leave intact. Yet in public he was hailed as hero. Survivors published accounts. Bartlett's The Last Voyage of the Karlak in 1916, William Laird McKinley's memoir, public speeches, lectures. These narratives shaped the legend of survival and human endurance. The scientific results of the expedition, though overshadowed by tragedy, did contribute to Arctic geography, meteorology, oceanography, and Inuit anthropology. In later years, historians reopened questions. Some modern researchers model ice drift, ship stress, and crew decision paths. Some re-examine Stephenson's role, his ambitions, and the split between science and expedition risk. Some revisit the possibility that supplies could have been managed differently, that the split parties could have been better coordinated, and that warnings about the ship's suitability were underweighted. Artifacts, diaries, photographs recovered during rescue tell part of the story. Field notebooks, scientific samples, sled gear, instruments. These survived and were brought back. They anchor the voices of those who knew the drift, the ice and the death. They give physical proof to survival, strife and direction. The map of route drift, camp locations, shifting ice lines, and final rescue align to allow modern reconstruction. Karluk's legacy is twofold, a cautionary tale of ice's power and a study in human will. The drift of a ship, the fragmentation of party, the death of some, the survival of others, all become threads woven into Arctic lore. The expedition's scientific promise collided with the unpredictability of ice and the challenge of leadership. The ice that trapped Karluk hid not just geography, but moral lines, decisions under strain, and the boundary between help and abandonment. 1967 Wilcox-Denali expedition. They reached the summit late, breathless and triumphant, as clouds gathered above. On July 15, 1967, 12 climbers from the Wilcox expedition and a merged Colorado group stood atop Denali. Some would descend safely, but 7 of them would never return, and in the blizzard that followed, the mountain erased their path. The team was young, enthusiastic, but mostly inexperienced at extreme altitude. Joe Wilcox organised the climb by sending out mailers and recruiting students for $300 payments to join. They combined with Howard Snyder's small Colorado crew to meet park rules. The route chosen followed the Muldrow Glacier via Carstens Ridge, a challenging and less used line. Climbers carried radios, maps, gear, but none had been above 15,000 feet before. The summit, at over 20,000 feet, loomed far beyond prior experience. Cutting across the tundra and glacier, the climbers advanced, establishing high camp at around 15,000 feet by July 13th. On July 14th, a stove accident damaged a tent at higher camp, but the group pushed on, despite the delay. By July 15th, 4 men, Wilcox, Snyder, Lewis, Schlichter, moved higher to reach Camp 18,000. Conditions were still manageable. They reached the summit around 6:30 p.m, reporting clear air, light wind and wide views. That window would close fast. They descended to high camp that night. On July 16th, a terrible storm was forecast. Strong winds and snow would strike. Some team members who could not continue summit attempt remained. Others prepared for the descent. At that point, the weather warnings should have been received. The National Park Service, via ranger contacts, had attempted to warn the group of incoming front movements. But radio delays and terrain interference made communication spotty. Some say Wilcox and Snyder did not receive timely notice. On July 17th, 7 climbers set out from high camp to summit. Clark, McLaughlin, Janes, Luchterhand, both Taylors and Russell, who later dropped back. They left late after 2:00 p.m, a risky decision. Jungles of snow and ice lay above, peaks of wind and exposure awaited. Those who remained below watched from the camp at 15,000 feet as clouds rolled upward. The summit group radioed at 8 p.m. they were lost in fog, would bivouac in place, and hope weather cleared. That call would be the last from most of them. By July 18th, the storm struck. Estimates of wind speeds vary. Some models put gusts at 100 miles per hour. Newer simulations suggest winds at summit levels may have reached as much as 300 miles per hour, the worst ever recorded for mountaineers. Temperatures plunged, visibility vanished, snowfall blanketed tracks. The summit group may have still been above 19,000 feet when the blizzard struck. They intended to descend in 5 to 10 minutes according to their 11:30 p.m. radio call, but minutes in whiteouts can stretch to hours. The 5 climbers waiting lower, Wilcox, Snyder, Schlichter, Lewis, Schiff, huddled in their camp, pinned by wind and snow, unable to ascend to help. After the storm abated on July 20th, they attempted to climb back toward high camp, but progress was minimal. On July 23rd, they began descending to mid-camps at around 12,100 feet, weakened and frostbitten. When they neared lower camps, they encountered Mountaineering Club of Alaska, MCA teams, who'd waited out the weather, offering food and warmth. Together, they attempted search for the missing 7. During search, bodies were located at various points. One body was found at high camp, leaning on a tent pole, frozen in place, suggestive of collapse just next to shelter. Others appeared below Archdeacon's Tower, sitting upright as if bracing against wind. Another was found near the snow bridge, close to Harper Icefall. But only 3 bodies were recovered with certainty. The remains were mostly skeletal fragments, too degraded for precise identification. The other 4 were never found. These recovery sites provide evidence. The locations imply that some climbers made it partway down but succumbed in blizzard conditions. The body at high camp suggests the occupant may never have left shelter. The 2 found near Archdeacon's Tower may have fallen returning from Summit Ridge. The figure upright on ridge hints a sudden collapse while descending in wind and chaos. The body in Harper Icefall Zone suggests a route into unstable terrain. The site positions are clues, but not proof. Analysis of decisions in the climb repeatedly frames key questions. Why did the summit group start so late? Why split groups across experience levels? Why push upward as the forecast warned of intensifying storm? Some argue that daylight thinking and summit hunger overrode caution. Others argue Wilcox's leadership was flawed in both planning and timing. In the 1968 expedition to bury remains, searchers found the bodies previously located had disappeared into snow and ice shift. That shows how ephemeral terrain is. In later years, Joe Wilcox defended decisions in his book White Winds, attributing the disaster mostly to the unpredicted severity of the storm, too extreme for human survival. Howard Snyder, in the Hall of the Mountain King, countered that delays, splitting routes, and ignoring radio warnings were factors that could have been mitigated. Each author accuses the other of flawed judgment. The debate remains alive among mountaineering historians. Modern weather models lend weight to the storm's ferocity. National Weather Service simulations, using historic data, suggest that wind speeds at high altitude may have briefly touched 300 mph, a level that would destroy tents, rip clothing, and disorient climbers instantly. Under such conditions, even shelter offers little protection. The lack of footprints past some points implies wind erosion. Tracks erased, bodies buried, routes lost. The weather becomes silent eraser. The media and public echoed the tragedy widely. The climb was called America's worst climbing disaster. Park Service considered closing Denali to climbers but declined. Bradford Washburn, eminent geographer, criticised the leadership and lack of experience on the team. Church and media called the young climbers heroic but reckless. Memorials were held, books published, debates heated. The narrative evolved into cautionary mythology, the mountain's lure, the newbie ambition, tragic end. Each recovered artifact mattered. Radios, maps, clothing, boots, ice axes, all preserved fragments offered hints. The snowmelt progression over years revealed some gear, but scattered, fragmentary, decayed. The direction and placement of objects helped investigators piece descent lines, likely collapse points, wind drift zones. Those fragments anchored physical meaning to the disaster's story. In later decades, new interpretations considered group decision dynamics. Some argue that the team should have stayed put when weather enclosed them, rather than attempt risky descent. Others argue that open radio networking should have allowed better weather updates. The role of dividing the group between summiters and non-summiters is scrutinized. Psychologically, the pushers may have felt compelled to reach summit despite warnings. Some inexperience may have masked poor judgment under stress. To this day, the exact hour of each death remains unknown. The identities of 2 bodies are speculative. The missing 4 are still lost within wind-blown snow. The narrative is held in radio transcripts, journals, search logs, weather models, and fragmentary bodies. The story remains a mountain of conjecture anchored by a few facts. The 1967 Wilcox expedition is not a vanishing into pure silence. Many survived. Many voices claimed witness. Artifacts remain, and media echoed the event. It is also partly a vanish point, because some climbers' remains were never found, and their last movements lost to storm and wind. The blend of rescue efforts, public reaction, and later reinterpretation makes it a chapter that reaches forward and backward through time, a meditation on judgment, weather, and the limits of human resolve amid mountain force. 1977 Mount Hood, Oregon Episcopal School. They set out before dawn, shrouded in early darkness and ambition. On May 12, 1986, Oregon Episcopal School students and faculty gathered at Timberline Lodge and then began a planned ascent of Mount Hood. The climb was intended as an educational challenge, an overnight excursion, but as storms gathered above, their courage would strain against nature's sudden violence. The group numbered about 20, 15 students, 2 faculty, a student's mother, and 2 guides. They left Timberline at around 2:30 a.m., hoping to ascend and descend in daylight. The weather forecast had warned of a potential multi-day storm, but leaders believed they could complete the climb before it struck. The mountain's slopes held snow and ice, melting spring drifts and hidden hazards. They followed established routes, moving steadily upward. As the group climbed, they encountered calf-deep snow and near-freezing temperatures. Visibility began to degrade. Some participants turned back early, students and the mother turned around due to illness. Others pressed onward into weakening light. The guide and faculty leadership felt pressure to keep group momentum, to reach summit or high camp quickly. Their decision to continue hinged on assumptions of timing and weather stability. By dusk, clouds thickened. Winds picked up. The snow turned finer and began filling tracks behind them. The group's decision to descend came too late. Darkness had advanced and disorientation set in. Whiteout conditions made locating the route nearly impossible. The group drifted off course, roughly moving sideways across the mountain slope instead of descending directly. In the snow and wind, landmarks vanished and maps became moot. Someone built a snow cave, a makeshift refuge, but it was too small for all to fit. Snow piled over the entrance, blocking air and limiting movement. Some students perhaps attempted to descend on their own. 2 rescuers walked into the storm after reaching daylight. They sketched paths and direction based on sun quartering and snow structure. Others stayed inside the cave waiting for rescue. The weather worsened as night deepened. Rescue teams responded quickly. Portland Mountain Rescue and other agencies were alerted early on May 13th. They faced fierce wind, low visibility, overturned vehicles, and instability on slopes. Helicopters attempted to survey for signals, but heavy snow and downdrafts grounded some flights. Searchers using avalanche probes and dog teams combed slope lines. A Master Sergeant from Air Force Pararescue, 304th Recovery Squadron, marked a probable search field with a flare from low altitude, providing direction to ground teams. By Wednesday evening, the snow cave was located. Helicopters carried out evacuations. 9 people were dead, 7 of them students, 2 adults, and 4 survived. 2 survivors had life-threatening hypothermia. 1 lost both legs to frostbite. The bodies outside the cave had been found scattered, some outside their gear, some partially buried by snow. The positions of bodies gave clues. Those outside had likely attempted to escape the cave or descend in chaos. The cave inhabitants perhaps succumbed to intake of cold air, blocked ventilation, or suffocation from snow buildup. Investigators examined what remained: clothing logs, route plans, radio transcripts, guide statements, weather station data, rescued gear. Analysis of clothing and insulation layers showed many participants were underdressed for sudden blizzard conditions. Some had only single base layers. Gloves and shell gear were thinner than ideal. The snow cave's collapse suggests that over-narrow sizing and snow accumulation reduced its ventilated airspace. The position of bodies suggested movement attempts, footprints in soft snow, mitten prints, scuff marks near cave walls. The radio log includes transmissions from guides requesting updates, but signals were weak. Terrain blocked communication. Some calls were delayed, untimed, lost. That hampered coordination. Weather station data show wind gusts increased rapidly in evening, with drop in barometric pressure coinciding to a storm front. That front struck just when the group was descending. The legal inquests faulted the expedition's prime decision, continuing after student turnbacks, underestimating storm speed, ignoring emerging whiteout conditions, starting descent too late. The school leadership was held responsible for a failure to abort when conditions worsened. The guide's role was questioned. Was he too trusting of schedule? Did he heed warnings sufficiently? The inquest determined misjudgment and poor risk assessment, rather than sabotage or unforeseeable catastrophe. Media reaction was intense. Newspapers ran front pages of teen climbers lost, school trip to death, Mount Hood horror. Public outrage demanded accountability. Parents of victims filed wrongful death suits. Oregon Episcopal School faced scrutiny over trip planning, staffing, and decision protocols. The disaster prompted reforms: mandatory emergency locator beacons, better weather communication, stricter equipment checks, and review of school-based wilderness education policies. The case advanced search and rescue techniques in Oregon and nationwide. Documentaries and books followed. Outside magazine called the tragedy Mount Hood's deadliest disaster. Climbing community debated whether the group should have turned back earlier, whether guides and faculty underestimated storm risk, and whether youth programs should ever include high alpine climbs. Memorials arranged each May near Timberline Lodge. The episode is still studied in mountaineering safety courses. Climbing accidents on Mount Hood are frequent. The 1986 OES grief stretched capacity. At that time, The mountain locator unit had not yet been widely adopted. After the disaster, miners of technology accelerated. The OES accident spurred adoption of locator beacons, mandatory gear standards, and better coordination between outdoor education programs and search resources. The rescue narrative became a tool for future prevention. In the search phase, daylight windows, helicopter flights, snow accumulation, and terrain difficulties forced piecemeal efforts. At times, rescuers were forced to withdraw due to blizzard, forced to wait until visibility improved. Rescuers built trenches, used avalanche sonars, probed snow depth lines. The complexity of accessing the snow cave area was high. Steep slopes, grid patterns needed across broad canvases. The speed of snow deposition after initial collapse masked footprints and signs, erasing clues. The rescue echo here is visceral. Radio calls, marked flares, ground probes, media urgency, public grief. Each artifact mattered. A student's glove carried body heat DNA. Route maps in the pack showed intended return lines, fragments of tent zippers, clothing tags, test-fit gear logs. These spoke of preparation and its limits. Searchers used those to reconstruct probable movement paths under constraints that evening snowfall had erased tracks. The artifact record anchors what could be reconstructed. The OES Mount Hood tragedy stands as testing ground for rescue protocols, outdoor education safety, and the sharp edge between youth adventure and mountain danger. It is borne out in howl of wind, blanked snow, buried cave, and loss. The echo of media, inquests, reform, and remembrance carries the disaster forward. The artifacts and logs whisper of choices, and the rescue effort echoes across time and policy. 1996 Everest disaster. At first, it looked like success unfolding. Dozens of climbers gathered at base camp, acclimatization in motion, summit bids planned. In May 1996, Everest welcomed more commercial teams than ever, bold, ambitious, under tight schedules. On May 10th, multiple groups moved for the summit. Hours later, 8 climbers would be dead, another season stained by controversy and conflicting evidence. The evidence lab in this disaster is rich. Radio logs, oxygen usage logs, weather forecasts, climbers' journals, site reports, and post-mortem data. From those fragments, investigators have reconstructed how a deadly blizzard overtook success. In many accounts, a critical false step occurred in delayed turnaround times. Leaders Rob Hall and Scott Fisher both agreed 2 p.m. was the latest time to turn back. But summiters reached the peak after 2:30 p.m. They climbed late. Bottlenecks at the balcony and the Hillary Step delayed climbers while fixed ropes had not been fully placed. These delays shifted descent into harsher daylight shadows. The club of evidence, summit times, fixed rope deficiencies, client fitness, oxygen reserves, all show the margin had already thinned. Radio transcripts show Hall communicating with base, confirming position, noting equipment issues, and eventually asking support to contact his pregnant wife. He and client Doug Hansen became stranded on a ledge in darkness, hypothermic. The logs reveal that Harris, Hall's guide, climbed up to assist but disappeared. The last radio from Hall said he was entombed by conditions, exhausted, registering low oxygen. He sent final affectionate lines, "Sleep well, my sweetheart, please don't worry too much." Later, his body was located at South Summit, but removed only years later. The fragments of his messages echo in the cold air. Meanwhile, guide Anatoly Bukhriv's movements became central. Bukhriv descended ahead of clients, according to his account, to be ready to rescue struggling climbers below. He claimed he could respond better from lower altitude than pushing higher with clients failing. He criticised the use of oxygen in certain cases. His book The Climb offers a different narrative from crack hours into thin air. The contrast between logs and personal accounts yields conflicting interpretations. Either he abandoned clients or he acted to save lives. That's the debate built on evidence threads. Other evidence comes from physical sites. Bodies were found at multiple points, Namba at about 7,900 m on the South Col, Hall and Harris near the South Summit, Fisher at about 8,300 m. Some bodies could not be recovered. Other climbers like Yasuko Namba, left near the South Col, were located later. Their position points to where collapse or freeze occurred. Frostbite pattern, clothing, oxygen cylinder status, and physical posture evidence helps infer how long they survived, whether they froze in place or tried to move lower. One striking detail is how several climbers survived initial collapse and later perished. Beck Weathers, presumed dead, regained consciousness and staggered down to Camp 4. He then survived further descent via helicopter rescue, but with severe frostbite. His survival offers contrast. Some died instantly, others lingered hours. His journal, his medical reports, his gear condition, all form a case study in high-altitude physiology under storm. Weather records and forecasts add to evidence. Forecasts had predicted a storm building on May 11th. Meteorological models later retroactively showed a sharp drop in barometric pressure, a spike in wind speed, and thinner oxygen partial pressure normal for such a front line. Simulations show that atypical low pressure may have reduced oxygen availability by up to 6%, further cutting climbers' ability to survive in the death zone. Those numbers suggest the storm wasn't entirely unpredictable. Evidence supports that warnings existed, but whether they were heeded is contested. Rescue efforts unfolded in chaos. Once the blizzard abated, teams descended to search sites. Helicopters attempted high-altitude evacuations. Sherpas and other climbers set out into deteriorated trails. Bukreev reascended alone to search for survivors below. He, along with others, retrieved Namba and Gao where possible. But several bodies remained on the mountain. The delay in rescue, altitude constraints, snowdrift, and route hazards limited what rescuers could do. Rescue helicopters at such heights were extraordinary operations with minimal margin. Media reaction exploded. John Krakauer's Into Thin Air, published a year later, brought the disaster into global conversation. It criticised guiding practices, aggressive schedules, competition among firms. Bukreev's The Climb responded, defending his choices and criticising Krakauer's portrayal. Public debate dissected whether commercialisation had pushed clients beyond safe margins. The echo widened into ethical scrutiny of guiding, risk, profit, and the meaning of summit or die culture. As reports, documentaries, and memoirs proliferated, the event gained what one might call rescue media echo. Interviews, transcripts, blame, apology, defence. Voices repeated across years. Each new account attempted to reweave the narrative. Some supported Hall, some Fisher, some Bukreev. Some blamed client pressure, some blamed leadership, some blamed nature's cruelty. The voices layered evidence with motive, reconstructing multiple plausible paths. Years later, analysts still revisit fixed rope line placement, client-to-guide ratios, oxygen provisioning strategies, radio protocol, turnaround discipline. Some argue Krakauer's narrative exaggerated conflict. Some defend Bukreev's rapid descent. Some point out that 8 deaths among dozens climbing would still be within risk norms, but the high profile made it catastrophic. The evidence library remains open. In rescue folklore, 1996 became a symbol. When future teams climb Everest, they carry mental baggage of that year. Guides refer to never summiting past turnaround time. Don't let summit bias override safety. Know your limits. The lessons echo. The crises of 1996 shaped expedition protocols, permit rules, oxygen station standards, and fixation on weather. The 1996 Everest disaster, unlike some vanish point cases, left abundant trace. Radio logs, bodies, accounts, scientific models. But even so, contradictions remain. Who truly erred on decision? Did Hall's empathy make him risk too much? Did Bukreev's style sacrifice clients but save lives? Did pressure from clients drive late summit bids? The evidence is rich but contested. This chapter carries the combined weight of evidence and echo. Climbers' words, weather indices, rescue reports, media reactions. It shows that some mysteries are not erased by data, they're intensified by it. The mountain judged more than physical strength. In 1996, we see not a silent vanishing but a tragedy broadcast, argued over, revisited, and still not settled. 2008 K2 disaster. This was no storm out of nowhere. On August 1st, 2008, as climbers pushed past Camp 4 toward the summit of K2, one misstep changed everything. A massive serac above the route collapsed, severing critical fixed ropes. In the moment those lines went, descent paths vanished, exposure exploded, and the mountain turned from conquest to disaster. K2 summits in 2008 came late. Teams waited through July for a weather window. At Camp the 4, climbers from multiple expeditions assembled. Dutch, Korean, Serbian, American, French, and Pakistani groups. Some had waited over a month. They expected assistance through the dangerous traverse and bottleneck section. But rope lines had been laid unevenly, some sections incomplete, others under strain. When the serac fell, the fragile network snapped. Survivors later described how climbers suddenly found ropes missing, their descent routes cut mid-line. Without those anchors, they were stranded in darkness. The collapse struck in the bottleneck, the most perilous section of the K2 route. Overhanging ice towers, seracs, hang above the couloir, shedding ice and debris unpredictably. One survivor recalled those formations as a few hundred meters wide and high. Every moment this serac can fall. The evidence showed fallen ice chunks smashed ropes, battered climbing lines, and left climbers above with no secure path down. Ger MacDonald, an Irish climber, is one of the names etched into this disaster. Witness accounts suggest he was struck during the collapse, possibly while aiding others. Reports indicate he delayed descent to help Korean climbers tangled mid-route. Some fragments from his gear suggested he freed climbers before being hit himself. His body was never recovered. Marco Confortola, another climber, survived. He later described the scene as shattered and chaotic, with ice, ropes and injured climbers scattered. His testimony and radio calls are some of the only first-hand records of the collapse moment. His words, passed on later in interviews, became part of the evidence archive. Because the ropes were gone, many climbers could not descend via the established lines. Some attempted alternate routes in darkness and exhaustion. Others became trapped, suspended or clinging to remnants of the ropes. A group of Korean climbers was reported to be entangled in the lines, hanging precariously. Survivors spoke of screams in the night, headlamps disappearing, and climbers falling into the abyss. Though details differ, all agree on the central moment. Collapse plus rope loss equaled entrapment. Physical recovery was limited. Some bodies were located later, often beneath the traverse cliffs or below the bottleneck, while others remain entombed under ice and debris. Where bodies were found helped reconstruct the sequence. Some perished instantly from falling ice, others fell in failed descent attempts, and a few died while waiting in place for rescue that never came. The distribution of bodies provided a map of how the disaster unfolded, though never the full story. Reconstruction efforts after the disaster produced different narratives. One version suggests MacDonald cut ropes to free trapped climbers before being killed by a second icefall. Another suggests he was already struck earlier and never managed to descend. Confortola's accounts shifted in retellings, leaving open questions about timing and sequence. Memory at high altitude, warped by exhaustion and trauma, often yields contradictions. In this disaster, contradictions dominate. The rope logistics remain one of the most dissected issues. Reports indicate that not all promised rope sections were set up before the summit push. Some lines ended short, forcing climbers to reclip mid-route. Some were laid too low, increasing exposure under the serac. When the collapse hit, the absence of redundant lines meant no backup path. Survivors later said that coordination between teams failed. Agreements on rope duties had not been fully carried out, leaving gaps that proved fatal. Weather worsened the chaos. Winds grew stronger, visibility dropped, and new snow concealed debris. After the serac collapse, more ice threatened overhead, preventing rescuers from advancing. Even as climbers attempted to retreat, they found themselves blocked by falling debris. The timing of collapses, the depth of snow over ropes, and the shifting hazards suggest multiple phases of disaster, not a single event. Gear fragments provided further evidence. Oxygen bottles found empty or unused, broken crampons, snapped carabiners, and shredded gloves tell of the desperate struggle. Some climbers carried rope sections or anchors they never managed to deploy in darkness. Others lost crucial gear in falls. Each piece recovered later serves as silent proof of the conditions and the frantic attempts to survive. The sequence of deaths stretched over hours. Some died instantly under icefall. Others remained alive into the night but perished in exhaustion or frostbite. Rescue attempts began from lower camps, but surviving climbers could not ascend safely into zones still threatened by the serac. Helicopter support arrived days later, lifting off the injured from lower camps but unable to assist those still trapped above. One of the most discussed decisions of that night is attributed to Ger MacDonald, staying to assist others rather than descend immediately. Accounts suggest he untangled trapped climbers before being overtaken himself. His action is debated as both heroic and tragic. Without his body or a complete record, his final moments remain uncertain. In the end, 11 climbers lost their lives. Survivors like Confortola and Van Rooyen managed to descend against odds but with permanent injuries. Van Rooyen in particular endured a solitary descent through alternate routes, frostbitten and near collapse, guided only by instinct and sporadic communication. His survival adds another piece to the evidence chain, showing how alternate descent paths were possible even after fixed lines were destroyed. The 2008 K2 disaster is often described as the mountain's deadliest day. It was not only the collapse of ice that doomed so many, but the absence of coordinated rope strategy, the sheer number of climbers crowded onto one narrow route, and the impossibility of rescue once the ropes were gone. Each factor layered with the others, until chaos turned summit day into catastrophe. The evidence lab for this disaster remains incomplete. Bodies still unrecovered, testimonies conflicting, gear fragments scattered, timelines disputed. Survivors' memories diverge, retellings evolve, and analysis changes with each passing year. But one truth is certain. When the serac above the bottleneck collapsed, it severed the lifeline of dozens of climbers. In that moment, order dissolved, and many never returned. 2014 Annapurna Thorongla storm, Nepal. They had thought the weather a nuisance, not a death sentence. In October 2014, dozens of trekkers set off across the high trail of the Annapurna circuit in Nepal, aiming to cross Thorongla Pass. That morning they departed guest houses at about 4,800 metres, planning to reach the pass and descend to Muktinath by nightfall. But by midday the sky darkened, snow began to thicken, and a cyclone remnant joined upper mountain patterns. What was supposed to be a normal trekking day turned into a savage winter storm. The storm struck with little warning. Snow fell at an astonishing speed, up to nearly 1.8 metres in 12 hours in some sectors. Winds howled, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The pass route disappeared under drifts. Trekkers described walking into walls of white, unable to see more than a few feet. Some groups tried to press forward in fading light. Others sought refuge in tea houses or small huts along the route. But many found themselves caught above the tree line, where open slopes and ridges offered no shelter. The disaster unfolded in layers. First came the snowstorm itself, blanketing paths, covering footprints and choking navigation. Then came avalanches in adjacent slopes, sweeping ice and rock into trails. Some trekkers trying to descend unknowingly walked into fresh snowfields that had already slid. Those caught beneath moving snow were buried or swept off the route. Others succumbed to hypothermia in heavy gear, wet clothes and high wind. Their bodies were later found scattered along ridges, drifts, partially buried under snow or clinging to rocks. Rescue efforts became desperate and chaotic. Helicopters from Nepalese army and international aid agencies were scrambled, but high winds and snow prevented many flights. In some cases, survivors or local guides sent handwritten notes down the mountain to alert authorities. Ground teams ascended into deep snow, probing routes with poles, digging through drifts, carrying medical supplies, and marking trails. Snow, blizzard and terrain slowed them severely. At times, the rescuers had to wait for brief weather windows to move upward. Over the next days, more trekkers were located alive, many suffering frostbite, hypothermia, snow blindness. Others were found dead. By October 19th, the rescue operation had brought down hundreds of survivors and recovered dozens of bodies. The death toll was officially at least 43 among trekkers, guides, porters and locals. In the worst trekker disaster Nepal had ever seen, many were foreign travellers, some poorly equipped or inexperienced. Local telecommunications and power systems had been knocked out by the storm, making coordination difficult. Investigators looked at the decision points made that day. Many trekkers had left too early or too late, without enough warning of the storm. Some groups lacked adequate gear, layered clothing, proper boots, warm sleeping equipment. Several guides misjudged the storm's severity or tried to push on in wind. The trail below Thorongla, above 5,400 metres, had few shelters. Tea houses were packed. Weather forecasts had signalled cyclone movement from eastern India days earlier, but travellers on the mountain had minimal access to those warnings. The route registration and checkpoint systems existed, but had limited capacity to alert trekkers on the move. Survivor accounts contributed critical evidence. One Israeli trekker described stumbling across frozen bodies and walking through stockpiles of abandoned packs in drifts. She recalled huddling in a tea house with dozens of other trekkers as the storm trapped them there for over 20 hours. Another witness said that when they emerged, they walked between the bodies and bags through deep snow, passing their dead friends as they fought for descent, These testimonies help map the timing and flow of collapse. The terrain features also factored heavily. Thorong La is one of the highest passes on the circuit, over 5,400 metres. Above treeline, the pass is exposed to wind, avalanche slopes and sudden storms. Many trekkers lack altitude acclimatisation experience. The snowdrifts had blocked rope lines, maker poles and guide markers. Without visual cues, trekkers lost orientation and strayed off trail. Some descended into wrong valleys, evidence of footprints leading away from pass trails into gullies or steep slopes appeared next to recovered bodies. The storm was later traced meteorologically to the remnant of Cyclone Hudhud. The tropical system had merged with an upper trough, pulling moisture and energy into the Himalayas. The result was an anomalously powerful blizzard. Rain, snow, wind combined unexpectedly above the passes. Satellite and weather data confirmed it was among the worst snowstorms in Nepal in a decade. The storm's speed and intensity outpaced local warning systems. After the storm, Nepal's government and trekking authorities faced harsh criticism. They pledged reforms. Among the measures introduced, better early warning systems, more emergency shelters along routes, stricter requirements for mandatory guides, GPS tracking for trekkers, and more centralised registration and communication systems. Some local districts said they would invest in meteorological stations to monitor upper mountain conditions. The disaster changed how Himalayan trekking is organised and regulated. In legal and policy reviews, the balance of responsibility was debated. Some faulted local guide agencies for not cancelling treks that day. Others blamed individual trekker agencies for risking clients on exposed high passes. Still others pointed to systemic inadequacy in weather warnings and infrastructure. The fact that many victims were inadequately equipped, wearing light jackets, carrying little extra gear, also drew criticism. The reforms that followed attempted to spread the burden, central coordination, more public alert and higher gear standards. The 2014 Annapurna blizzard thus lives in both timeline and echo. The trail that day became a battlefield of wind and ignorance. The rescue efforts, media coverage, policy changes, and survivor stories sustained its memory. In subsequent trekking seasons, pass crossings have been delayed or cancelled when forecasts warn of cyclones. The mountain still holds danger, but the rules of the trek have shifted, because in October 2014 the pass turned from pathway into trap and dozens paid with their lives. Everett Roos, 1934, Utah Desert. They carved a name into rock, Everett Roos 1934. It was the last quiet trace of a man who walked into the desert and vanished. In late November of that year, a young explorer, poet, artist and wanderer from California set out into Utah's remote canyons. No one ever officially saw him again. His camp, his donkeys, inscriptions in stone, those are the threads left behind in a vast silence. He was 20 years old by then, but already known for bold, solitary journeys across the southwest. Rues had travelled desert trails, painted canyon walls, lived with Navajo, and walked miles with a burrower as companion. His letters to family, scattered journals and photographs describe daily wonder, solitude and resolve. In November 1934, he embarked from Escalante, Utah, heading north into the Escalante Grand Staircase region. His two donkeys, Dewey and Hidalgo, carried his modest gear. He left a note in his camp stating he was heading into hole-in-the-rock country. He stocked provisions and then disappeared. In December, area cattlemen and searchers looked for signs of him. Early discoveries provided hope. Bones of donkeys, a pack saddle, a canvas tent, inscriptions scratched on canyon walls, and a signature carved on a rock. Nemo 1934, and sometimes E. Ruus 1834. These walls became the gospel of his last path. Over the following years, search parties combed the slick rocks, alcoves, slot canyons, and side washes. They found metal can lids, axe blades, bits of leather strapping, a notebook page with sketches, but never Rues himself. The donkey bones were identified as his animals. The campsite gear matched what he had carried. The inscriptions on rock remained the strongest evidence that he passed certain routes. But none of these items revealed fate or final steps. Over decades, the myth grew. Some claimed Rues had purposefully walked into a canyon wash and drowned or fallen from cliff. Others speculated he embraced an intentional disappearance or death by exposure. Some voices suggested foul play or that someone else had removed him. Because no remains were confirmed, each theory stayed speculative. In 1940, a search party found copies of Ruiss's letters describing his love of solitude, self-reliance and willingness to wander. His own words suggest he knew risk. He wrote of wanting to disappear into the silence, of being part of the land. Those words have fueled both admiration and doubt. Did he die accidentally, or choose not to be found? In 2009, Utah authorities reviewed the case as a cold missing person file. The state criminal identification branch held copies of the inscription records, bone reports and gear descriptions. They noted the lack of human remains and the risk of similar names being used to mislead. They classified him as presumed dead but left the file open. They also documented misclaims over years, people claiming to be relatives or offering discarded bones that failed laboratory comparison. In 2009, Utah legislators enacted a law presuming disappearance after 5 years in cases like Ruiz, but that does not erase the urge for closure. Later explorers conducted new searches using aerial photography, LiDAR scans, drone reconnaissance. Some believed they saw recesses or footprints in canyon floors that might match footprints in his days. Others dismissed those as naturally formed depressions. In 2016, a skull fragment was found near Ruiss's known route, but subsequent forensic testing failed to match his dental records. In 2018, rumours circulated that skeletal remains in an old cemetery in Boulder, Utah had been misidentified in the 1930s and could be Ruiz, but records disprove correlation. Every rediscovery attempt reopens the case, but leaves the vanish point unchanged. Ruiss's family preserved his letters, journals and photographs. These archives went to university special collections. Scholars pore over them. His sketches of archways, his measurements of canyon walls, his route notes. Some historians match those notes to modern topography and suggest likely paths through Coyote Gulch, the Escalante and the San Rafael Swell. These reconstructions place him in remote bypasses far from ranching roads where foot traffic was rare. They suggest he likely perished in an arroyo, died of exposure or fell unseen into a deep canyon. His signature carvings, Nemo, Everett Ruiz, 1934, became markers travellers seek. Some disappear, weathered, others remain. Hikers report spotting them deep behind carved walls, often accompanied by dated hash marks or sketches. That they were made in limestone walls that erode slowly gives a fragile permanence. But inscriptions are ambiguous. Matching style is subjective. Signatures can be mimicked. Some inscriptions once thought his have faded or been doubted. The vanish point remains that high desert canyon country. No remains, no last word, no farewell note other than those etched on stone walls. The fortress of wilderness swallowed him. His maps and letters built tentative trails. His inscriptions mark pieces of movement. His donkeys died, come home. His gear was found, but he never came back. In the quiet of desert twilight, Ruiss's name drifts among canyon echoes. Each new hypothesis, fallen, drowned, hidden, gone, is weighed against the absence of proof. His legacy glows in journals and rock faces. He may walk still in dreams. The silence holds him. Jim Thompson, 1967, Cameron Highlands. He disappeared into the forest without a trace. In March 1967, Jim Thompson, known as the Thai Silk King, went for a walk amid Malaysia's Cameron Highlands and never came back. What began as a short stroll along trails turned into one of Southeast Asia's most enduring disappearances. The forest swallowed him, and all that remains are rumours, footprints, empty rooms, and an echo in headlines. Thompson was not an adventurer by training. He was an art patron and entrepreneur who revived Thailand's silk industry after World War II. He was cultured, cosmopolitan, with a love for Asia's jungles, antiques, and mystery. On March 26, 1967, he was staying overnight at the Moonlight Bungalow in the Cameron Highlands at Tanah Rata. That evening, he told friends he would go for a late walk at 8 p.m. to visit a local cafe. He left the bungalow lightly dressed, wearing only slippers with no hat or torch. He stepped out into the dusk and faded into the forest. The bungalow's staff realised he had not returned by 10:45 p.m. They searched the immediate area, shouted, looked for footprints. The ground was soft and wet, forest dense with vines, tea bushes, steep slopes and ravines. The terrain offered countless hiding places. Searchers assumed he might have fallen or lost his way. The next morning, a massive search got underway. Rescue efforts spread fast. Malaysian police, local villagers, military and volunteers fanned out across ridges, valleys, streambeds and plantations. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning tree canopies and steep gullies. Foot searchers probed trails. Dogs were used, but dense undergrowth blunted scent trails. They unearthed strange clues. A footprint matched to his rubber slipper, broken twigs, disturbed underbrush, an open gate. But no body, no blood, no sign of struggle, no conclusive path forward. Over the months that followed, the search was massive and highly scrutinised. Police released maps of search zones. Authorities launched multiple expeditions, sometimes burdened by political interest and media pressure. International reporters arrived. The Malaysia Public Works Department cleared new paths, built ladders along cliffs, probed deep holes. Some searchers descended into sinkholes, others cut through dense jungle. But after a year, efforts dwindled. The public remains fascinated, the forest remains silent. Evidence collected is thin. The shoe imprint confirmed his last known direction. A pair of footprints in a soft patch led inward. Some local villagers claimed to have seen a white man in the forest days later, but witness memory was vague. Some accounts suggested he may have made it to an old trail and disappeared into a ravine. Later speculation claimed he may have joined local tribes, moved off the grid, or been abducted. But none of these stories stand on hard proof. Authorities in Malaysia catalogued all recovered items, pieces of clothing, coins, small trinkets, a broken umbrella in undergrowth together with litter collars. None were decisively linked to Thompson. Some were misclaims. Tourists claimed to have seen remains or bones, but tests disproved connections. Ongoing reviews by the police keep the case filed as missing, presumed dead. Over time, public fascination turned the disappearance into legend. Documentaries, books, TV reports, internet forums and expeditions renewed interest. Amateur sleuths retraced his steps. Tour groups visit the bungalow, the trails and the forest paths looking for signs. The story of Jim Thompson vanished became a staple of Malaysian tourism lore. In 2020, an Indonesian tourist said he found human bones in a cave near Cameron Highlands. Local authorities exhumed them. DNA tests showed they did not match Thompson. In 2011, a former police inspector claimed Thompson had been murdered over debts and his body hidden. The claim received media attention but lacked hard evidence. The police dismissed it. Over the years, numerous confessions, some by criminals seeking notoriety, have gummed up the record. None showed viable proof. The vanish point in this case is the jungled slopes outside Cameron Highlands, in darkness, with no reliable map, no torch and no path. The forest is thick. Moss, vines, fern understory, steep ridges, hidden streams, uneven terrain. A man in slippers under those conditions would risk slipping, falling, exhaustion, or becoming disoriented. If he fell into a gully or was washed into a waterway, his remains could have washed downstream or been buried in sediment. In that environment, bodies decompose, are scavenged or vanish under leaf litter and decay. Even if he lay somewhere nearby, dense growth could conceal him indefinitely. The rescue echo remains strong. Each anniversary brings media retrospectives. Writers publish new speculative theories. Foreign press revisits the case. Tour operators include it in guides. The tale lives in guidebooks and magazines. Thompson's name is repeated in popular Malaysia mysteries. Each generation asks, what if they missed him by meters? What if a slip, a wrong turn, a tired foot, those final steps within reach? The legacy includes the bungalow itself. Moonlight Bungalow stands preserved. Visitors peer at its shuttered windows, the paths outside, the forest edge. A small plaque marks the site where he walked out. The trail to the destination cafe is blocked now, or so some guides say, but local forest keepers sometimes point to an edge trail into the jungle. That trail is monitored by guides trying to deter trekkers from following phantom paths. Jim Thompson's disappearance remains a vanish point. No bones, no body, no final campsite. Only the echo of search efforts, media scrutiny, rumours and broken footprints. He disappeared from the world in slippers into the green silence, and the forest holds its secret in shadows, roots and wind. Carl McCunn, 1981, Alaska. He was a man with a camera, dreams of solitude, and a plan to capture nature's secrets. In March 1981, Carl McCunn hired a bush pilot to drop him off at a remote lake in Alaska's Brooks Range, intending to spend 5 months photographing wildlife. He carried loads of film, provisions, 2 rifles, a shotgun, and confidence. His voice, inked in diary pages, would outlast his body. He arrived at his chosen lake in March, dropped into wilderness silence. His camp was remote, far from any regular flight path. He believed a friend would fly him out by August. That arrangement, however, was never confirmed. In those early days, McCunn's diary shows optimism. Geology, birds, lighting, ice conditions. He began ferrying gear, laying snares, collecting wood and fuel, scouting animals. He documented the tundra, caribou trails, snowmelt rivulets, muskrat holes, tracks of predators. The world was still large and alive in his words. In midsummer, a mistake began to unfold. McCunn found 5 boxes of shotgun shells among his supplies. He wrote in the diary that he felt foolish carrying them and decided to throw them into the lake, drowning the extra weight in water. He writes that he tossed them while muttering about making the pack lighter. But those shells would have given him ammunition for small game, potentially crucial food later. That disposal is now seen as a fateful error. As summer passed, McCunn's plane did not arrive. He watched the sky, listened for propellers, stared north hoping for a float plane. In August, in his journal he wrote, "I think I should have used more foresight about arranging my departure. I'll soon find out." He acknowledged worry that the pilot might not come. Day by day, hunger edged in. The weather turned wet. Rain and wind invaded the camp. The lake froze precipitously. Snow began to fall. He rigged snares for rabbits, trapped muskrats, attempted fishing with chain-weighted nets. Each line is sketched in his pages. But the wildlife was sparse. Many snares were raided by foxes and wolves. Meat was limited. Caloric reserves dropped dangerously low. He also noted small behavioural shifts: cold fingers, dizzy spells, chills, skin numbness. On some entries he admitted being afraid, writing, "I didn't come out here for this." On another he pleaded, "Come on, please, don't leave me hanging and fretting like this." He mentioned despair creeping in, tone softening, entries growing more fragmented. He recorded thoughts of moving toward Fort Yukon, roughly 75 miles away, but he judged that route too dangerous given snow, terrain, and his decline. He wrote of being too weak to travel. He noted frostbite forming in his hands, losing finger dexterity needed to make stacking wood or set traps. His body was losing the tools of survival, and he wrote letters in his last notebook entries. One was addressed to his father, instructions for developing film, requests about personal items, a plea that whoever found him pass belongings to his family. He pinned his Alaska driver's license to that note. In the pages he even scribbled a mercy. "Dear God in heaven, please forgive me my weakness and my sins. Please look over my family." He resolved that when the time came he would not continue in pain. In the diary he writes, "They say it doesn't hurt." That line is often quoted as the threshold between hope and acceptance. Winter's grip tightened. Snow buried the camp. He used remaining fuel to build a fire, burning everything flammable. He waited, listening to wind, watching for flight. On January 26th, authorities began to worry when McCunn did not emerge that fall. The state troopers flew a reconnaissance mission over the lake camp. The pilot reported seeing an orange sleeping bag on the ice and thought he glimpsed McCunn waving casually. That signal, traditionally meaning "I'm okay, do not wait," misled the searcher from landing or investigating further. Frosted slopes, increasing depth of snow, and low visibility prevented follow-up until February 2nd. When troopers landed on skis near the lake, they found McCunn's tent zipped shut. They cut it open. Inside lay his body, emaciated, frozen, a suicide pistol nearby, and his diary of some 100 pages intact. The coroner's inquest confirmed he had died of a self-inflicted gunshot after months of starvation and despair. His remains bore no signs of trauma beyond that final act. Investigators then reconstructed his errors and timeline. First, McCunn had no confirmed retrieval plan. He assumed a friend would fly in but never secured it. No backup plan, no communication channel. Second, by discarding the shotgun shells, he reduced his ability to hunt small game later. Third, he chose a campsite far off route, reducing probability of being found by flying crafts. Fourth, his signal mistake, waving a "do not wait" sign, compounded misinterpretation by searchers. Fifth, his decision to remain in the tent rather than attempt walking out given snow and weakness likely sealed his fate. His diary stands as the survivor's lens. It exposes every misstep, every thought, every progression of decline. It lets us hear him, the bright first weeks, the cautious hope, the drift into darkness, the bargain with death. In contrast, the investigative timeline gives us the external markers: supply drops, flight plans, search decisions, aerial recon runs, inquest reports. Together they form a portrait of failure, caution, and inevitability. McCunn's case is not mysterious in the sense of disappearance. His body was found, his death confirmed. But the tragedy lies in how human ambition, assumptions, and miscalculations beset a well-prepared traveller, shifting him from photographer to victim. His diary remains a warning. Being alone with nature is to negotiate with all your planning and your misjudgments. His life ended in that remote lake, but his words endure. These lives remind us how thin the line is between adventure and tragedy. Camps abandoned, messages left unfinished, trails lost to time, all speak to human courage and human limits. The answers may never come, but the echoes of these stories endure, carried by the places where they vanished.